I can hear you just fine.
Okay. Oh, that's not. Okay. Now I've got an echo. That's no good. I can hear myself.
It sounded like somebody was getting your sound,
Yeah,
but
just
it's
very quickly. I think they can hear it now. So Darren says, okay, so just to sound test, can everyone hear me clearly? Excellent, Gordon. Can everyone hear Jeffrey when he speaks? When he speaks.
looks like people are. Yeah.
You can hear Jeffrey. Excellent. Wonderful. So, I'll start again. Welcome everybody. My name is Bob Greenyer and I'm a volunteer with the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project. We're going to be doing something a little bit different this 13th of October 2024, and I can't even put a capital O on October, so there we go. And we're going to have a bit of discussion about crop circles, and this is something we've been discussing for the last 2 weeks, and it is a real pleasure to be able to have Jeffrey Wilson join me on this discussion, and also Andrew Johnson hopefully will be joining me in a little while, and he will give something from his perspective. So, hi, Gary Johnson, Get Wrecked, Professor J. Paul de Vierville, Martin Kemp, Bo Sinclair, Yin Gazler is in the house. Hi, Nick Moore, Athena Mack, Gordon Doherty, Jock of Ages, Ken Pratt, Harry, Screwdriver Tuning, Steve A, Corky Goss. It is wonderful to have you all here. Thank you very, very much. Verity Hound, thank you very much. We've even got Burn Eye right at the top there. Hi, Chris Marston. And Child, and we've got Malcolm Bendel in the house and Luke Threadgold. Okay, so I'll stop calling names. Does anyone know who we have on the front slide here? Does anyone know who that is? Anyone? Anyone out there know who I'm looking at there? He's Nobel Prize winner. Nobel Prize winner. No one know who we're looking at there. Well, it might be because you've only seen his photo in black and white. Not Levengood. It's a good guess because we're going to be talking about Levengood. I know the face, but I don't know his name. Well, I can tell you who that is. Bert Jansen. No, it's not Bert Jansen. No. All good guesses. No. This photo is actually AI coloured in Photoshop. That is the default output of the AI. But this is Piotr Kapitsa. Piotr Kapitsa. And who is Piotr Kapitsa? Well, hopefully my thing will work here. He was awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1978. He received this honour for his fundamental inventions and discoveries in the field of low-temperature physics. One of his most notable achievements was the discovery of superfluidity in liquid helium in 1937. And of course, we've been talking about how it would appear that these electrodynamic structures are able to force, in a torsional sense, and focus the relic neutrino condensate, which is itself a superfluid, and cause these hexagonal arrays in the destruction of matter. I've shown you a couple of examples. One which you probably didn't know was the same thing, was in the Hutchison effect. It was in my background slides of my ICCF 25 presentation, sneakily put in the background there, flag planting. And there was another example in the subterranean area structure of the pyramid, which is actually on the brass plate of one Henk Urian's sacred geometry ball lightning structure. And if you recall, it had this hexagonal array and these little cavities and a little round bit in the middle where the flux is being pushed through. And this would be the same kind of thing that would be occurring at the focal point, the area of destruction in ball lightning, in the structures that we've been looking at all of this time. And so I've got a link there. You can go and see his Nobel Prize page if you go there. But Piotr Kapitsa, for me, is a name that is very seminal in the story of ball lightning. And I have never read his paper, and I still haven't read it, and we're going to read it together. He had a theory of ball lightning formation, and he was a Soviet physicist. And he suggested that ball lightning is a result of electromagnetic interference. Okay, well, in our supernova and nova experiments, you know that we have standing waves of microwaves in our 2.45 gigahertz reactors, and that they appear to produce ball lightning structures. And I'm sure everyone has seen the grape thing where you put the you put the grapes cut and you put them in a microwave and it produces what looks like a ball lightning, and that comes up and maybe burns through a piece of borosilicate glass or something like that, or damages the microwave. These things are effectively, you've got standing waves in your microwave, and there are some resonances going on and interactions with the material in there, and it leads to these structures being formed. And we found it in those experiments that from, it would seem, just charcoal or graphite, we'd end up producing these iron-rich crenellated microspheres. Although because it is genuinely hot in there, because the carbon actually thermalizes a lot and it's mixing everything up, these do end up less perfect spheres. But we have seen some that are hollow, and we have seen some with the crenellations, and they've actually been really rather big in some cases, up to 500 or so microns. So he says that according to his theory, ball lightning is formed by the interference of electromagnetic waves, which creates a stable spherical configuration of the electromagnetic field. And of course, we've discussed how potentially the Foo Fighters in the Second World War, where there were lots of high-powered, unnecessarily high-powered radars pointing up at aircraft, and they had their aluminium or otherwise metal components in the aircraft that were reflecting the radio frequencies. And if you get a reflection, and depending on the distance between you and the radar, you might have phase conjugation, and this would lead to scalar waves. And if you had multiple radar pointing, you could end up with a scalar interferometry, and this would still be the interaction and interference of electromagnetic waves. So right there and then, you get something that is compatible with the concept of Foo Fighters. His hypothesis was based on the idea that certain solutions to the Maxwell equations can describe these stable spherical formations. Now, if we go back to what I just said about the Foo Fighters, there was an interview with Schellenberger earlier this week, and it was with the Australian journalist who interviewed me some time ago, and I can't remember his name. I'm very sorry to him, but I'm going to get it for you now. Preparation is everything, Bob. Let me get that for you. If anyone can get there before me, that would be great. Okay, can you get there before me? Am I going to do it before you? Okay, so it was Ross Coulthart. So Ross Coulthart, if you recall, interviewed me on the 11th of January 2021 in preparation for his book about the UAP, or whatever it is, science and observations around the world. And I told him my experience where my father in 1979 told me and my brothers and my sister to come downstairs and look up into the sky east in Worthing. And we saw these lights appear, shift to my left, then to my right, and then to my left, and then disappear, and then he told us to go to bed. That was just my experience. I didn't realize until last year that there isn't another story quite like that out there, where there was a known event going to happen for a certain amount of time, and then when it's over, it was also known that it was stopped. Essentially, what I found out last year, that it probably was projected from the world's oldest purpose-built airfield, which is in Sussex, and it is Shoreham Airfield. And that was the first, actually it was the first purpose-built airport. There was an airstrip built a year earlier for the Wright brothers to land their plane on. And so I don't know whether it was my friends, my father's friends in the Navy that were doing that show for us, or whether it was his friends in the Masons, but whatever, it happened. And that was in 1979, the same year that the paper on intergalactic travel, based on how it was expected UFOs could be operated, was presented to NASA. And if people don't know what I'm talking about, they need to go and look at my practical applications of the fractal toroidal moment presentation from ICCF 25. And the paper is by A.C. Holt, August 1979, Field Resonance Propulsion Concept. And it's exactly showing something, as we know, is the signature structure of a toroidal moment bearing structure. And it was based, according to A.C. Holt, on the known properties of UFOs, the same kind of thing which I observed my father showing to us in 1979, the same year, and all the kind of things that they've been pretending they're revealing in Congress over the last couple of years. Well, anyway, what happened this week was Schellenberger was having this release of some information regarding a whistleblower that's gone to Congress about how this immaculate constellation. And there was one example where there was the top end publicly admitted US military aircraft was being tracked by one of these orbs, and as the plane was rolling and turning around and rolling, the orb was being locked to the starboard side of the craft. Now, I have not heard of anyone else mentioning this, but I'll say it now. There's one very obvious thing that description tells you. And what is that? Can anyone guess? That if you have an aircraft and it's able to turn, roll, and whatever, what is that telling you? Well, are you still there? What it's telling me is, well, yes, Darren's had a shot at plasmoid. Phase locked, yes, it's locked in phase with the rotation and orientation of the plane. Corky Goss says spin, it's a gyroscope, coherence, all good ideas, yes. However, what that tells me is that if you are able to control something through a plane, okay, that is either not reflecting, because it's a stealth vehicle, so it's very important that it's a stealth vehicle, because it's not reflecting the electromagnetic waves. So one, that tells you that it is not scalar waves because of the reflected electromagnetic radiation. It's able to go through this aircraft, which presumably is either transparent to EM or is able to absorb it. Yes, Darren says it's the scalar wave. Yes, it's scalar wave. So that particular testimony to me proves that this is interference of scalar waves that are causing these orbs. This is what I've maintained from the beginning. If we look at the work of Tom Beard and you actually try and understand it, it will tell you that scalar wave interferometry is the way that this works. So from my point of view, that testimony if corroborated and it is published by the Senate, this tells you 100%, in my view, that scalar wave interferometry is the way that these things are manipulated. Not necessarily made, but we have Kapitsa saying that electromagnetic interference is the way that this is produced. Now,
Question,
go on.
Bob.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
If you're making that conjecture, you should be able to calculate the energy necessary to have created that effect, and you should be able to back into where the interferometer is, right? The points of the interferometer, right?
Well, because you're using scalar waves, it could be on the other side of the planet. In fact, it could be anywhere. You understand? Because it doesn't interact with normal electromagnetics.
Okay.
So you only need two locations somewhere, at least, ideally three, to give precise locking. So
But
you,
what would the power output be needed for that
well,
for
this is the
something like
incredible thing. Because there's no losses in the electrodynamic structure. Once you build the 3 Tor or 4 Tor structure, the subtors will build beyond that. But you only need a Tor of a wheel within a wheel within a wheel, and then it's stable for 2 days. You actually have to actively destroy it. So once you get it past a critical threshold, it starts feeding from the environment itself. So then you're just using the scalar interferometry to move it around, okay? And you can vector in 3 dimensions with 3 scalar traveling waves. So you basically have an electromagnetic wave, and then it's 180 degrees out of phase to make your phase conjugation, and then that you phase shift to be able to cause a traveling wave. So you can push forward and backwards with the phase shift. And then the orientation, once you've got a crossed beam, if the 2 beams are crossing, then you can lock and you can move forward and backwards and cross. So, it could be controlled by base stations, it could be controlled by aircraft, it could be controlled by satellites, it could be controlled by undersea submarines. Like the ways to control this are fantastic. What I saw in 1979, I believe, was not even necessarily early versions of this technology. It was a version of the technology that was practical to deploy, at least as decoys. And as I said, the Kilbini technology that they strap onto the side of Russian Federation planes right now, they can get any old plane and stick this kind of stealth technology on the side. They can create a bubble in which electromagnetic waves just are absorbed so they don't reflect, so you can't use normal radar. But moreover, by creating from these I think it's Klibini, or it's a mountain range in Russia, they call it after, they can actually create bogies which are fake, and they can by arranging them and by phasing them, you can actually create, and by spinning it up to a certain degree, you should be able to create heat signatures of the aircraft that the plane is trying to attack with its heat-seeking guided missiles. You understand? You create a fake exhaust, and it's in the infrared. You don't visibly see it, but the missile will see it. So I think it's the Klibini or Kilbini system. I think it's able to create, firstly, it creates a bubble in which many planes can travel in stealth mode. And then it can also transmit fake targets for guided weapons to just try and hit. But when they get there, there's nothing there. They keep flying and probably keep flying back onto the thing that doesn't exist. So the level and options for where you can create fake orbs. So like if you wanted to convince a load of people that there was an alien invasion, you just need to get the thing in the mind of people that there were these orbs and they were the aliens and they were coming to get us. And then you just use this and you create as many as you like by and moving them around. So it's targeting, anti-targeting, defense, shielding. It's such a powerful tool. But this one testimony this week, in my view, completely and categorically seals the deal that this is scalar wave technology. Hi, Andrew.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Perfect. Right. So I'm just going to read for the first time Piotr Kapitsa's paper on ball lightning. I've never read it before. I'm doing this real time for people here. It was on the Internet Archive, but the Internet Archive has been taken down. But I move a little bit before they shut me down, so you can get this elsewhere. Now, unfortunately, I'm using Adobe Acrobat, which seems to shut my computer down. So if everything freezes, it's because of that. It's certainly pausing a lot. So give me a second whilst this works. How are you, Andrew?
Yeah, very well, thanks. I was just going to get to a PowerPoint I'll probably talk about a couple of things in that
Okay.
later on if I get a chance.
So before I just run through Kapitsa's paper, Andrew Johnson, when he saw that I was producing iron-rich crenellated microspheres in our experiment, and some weird effects going on with metals and transmutation, for various reasons, he reached out to me, and we were able to hook up. And it was him that showed me the spheres from crop circles. So I have to give credit to Andrew Johnson for showing me those spheres in crop circles for the first time. And it wasn't until earlier this year, when studying what I call the sword in the stone, the steel knife that was embedded and teleported into or shifted into a aluminum block of John Hutchison, that my predicted and also suggested by Ken Shoulders, who was the proponent of EVOs as an extended idea for the plasmoids, and they're effectively ball lightning. He suggested that these structures could envelop things and effectively make them disappear in terms of charge sense. And so it was with that in mind that I looked under the SEM earlier this year, and I observed the yin-yang structures that we all know at the right scale that we've all come to understand, as observed by Ken Shoulders and also verified by Russian researchers like Alexander Shishkin. And I presented that at the Cosmic Summit, where we found also on that boundary layer between the knife and the aluminium iron-rich crenellated microspheres. So the Hutchison effect employs this same process, and whatever you think about the Hutchison effect, this also goes to show some amazing things that can be done by these kind of range of technologies. So it was Andrew Johnson that introduced me to John Hutchison, so I also have to thank him for that. So a big hand for Andrew Johnson. Thank you very much, Andrew. So if it's okay with you, I'm going to try and get this paper running, but it's not currently running, so I'm going to have to kill my Acrobat here. Do you want to run a presentation? I will stop sharing, Andrew, and then I will come back to Kapitsa's paper and how it feeds into what I think is going on, rather than what was understood up to now in terms of the blowing out of these nodes and so forth.
Sure. I mean, I have not got a lot of time this evening.
Yes, I understand. That's why I'm asking you to go first. Yeah.
So maybe I think I could sort of say what I wanted to say. Probably take about, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And I can show you a few slides, and then that would probably be my sort of two penneth, as it were.
Okay. So let me just.
I'm not quite ready. I'm just loading the files because I'm on a different computer, but I'm nearly ready to sort of share.
Okay, Jeffrey, do you want to step in then whilst he's loading his files and I'm fixing my Acrobat to give a little bit of your history in the field of crop circles, and maybe if you've got any understanding of ball lightning, that would be great too.
Okay. Well, I actually started to look at crop circles all the way back in 1988. I had just entered the university. Eastern Michigan University is where I went. I studied a whole range of things, but I ended up getting a degree and ended up teaching physics and astronomy for a while before I got out of academia. One of the things that I wanted to write my thesis on was about crop circles, but I couldn't get any academic sponsors for that. Shockingly,
not surprising.
Right? So, but after a number of years of researching crop circles, we ended up forming an organization to try to pool resources together to go out and do that work. I spent a bunch of time, working with Levingood. I only lived about an hour away from him, and so I would go over there often, and we would talk about all kinds of things. But I don't know if I can share my screen
Yeah,
real
you
quick.
can try that. Let's try that.
Let's see if I can. Uh, well, what I was gonna try to do is just show one slide since you were talking about those little iron
Yeah,
spheres.
go for it. Go for it.
And if I can get the zoom to show up here so that I can do that. I don't know where that's. It's not giving me an option to share it.
It's down the bottom. Normally, you roll over Zoom, click the button Share, and then you
Yeah,
choose what you're
it's
sharing.
not. Let's see
You
here.
got the green. Are you in the web browser because it doesn't have the Share button?
Well, I'm in the Zoom Workplace
Okay.
one, and it doesn't really show me that. So, well,
If you go
while you're
down to
looking
the
at that,
bottom, surely you've got participants, chat, react. Have you got that at the right at the bottom?
I do. Yep.
There should be share. You might, I've got a share button, so Bob's definitely enabled it. Next to AI companion, that's what I've got on mine.
Same
You should
here.
have a share button there. But
Yeah,
that's
okay. I've got one. It was in a drop down menu, so let's
Oh,
see
right,
if
because you
I
yeah.
shrunk
can.
the page. Yes. Okay.
Yeah. So let me see if I can pull this up. Um, you guys see that?
You might do. Yeah, I can see something happening.
I think that's coming up now. That's it.
Yes, look at that. Wonderful.
Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't put it in presentation mode, but you can still see that, right?
Yeah, it's
So
great.
this is a particular crop circle that I investigated with our group in 2004 in Ohio. And we did collect soil samples from this, and Levingood and myself and a couple other people did the methodology to separate out and look at the higher concentrations of those micro iron spheres. And you can see how they are kind of chained up due to them being a little bit magnetized. But I just forgot I would share that so that you can see, from yet another crop circle what we, were looking at.
Mm-hmm.
So if that was one of the
So,
things
so,
that
so this crop circle, where, sorry, come again. Where was this?
this was in Ohio and near a
Yep.
little town called Miamisburg.
Mm-hmm.
This is in maize corn, about 8, 10 feet tall. I got a call from the Montgomery County Sheriff's Department. They had a traffic helicopter flying over, saw this, and called me up and said, "This is your kind of thing." We actually went out there. There was a fire station at the front of the field that had the previous day been hit by lightning through a major thunderstorm that had come through.
Okay.
And actually, the firefighters helped us to investigate this. We investigated this into the night, and they put up big, giant floodlight beams, and uh,
Awesome.
we we got a whole range of unusual effects, in this. Uh, the kinds of unusual plant effects we detected, you know, unusual electromagnetic field readings as sort of an after effect. But I just wanted to, since you were talking about those microspheres, I figured I would just pull this up so people could see what that is
I, I would
in a
like to
out
ask
of
you, Jeffrey,
thing.
do you have
Yeah.
some samples of what you see on the screen there that you could send me?
Um, I'm not sure if we still have that. I'd have to look. I mean, that's been like 20 years since we, did that investigation.
Mm-hmm.
And most of that stuff ended up at Levingood's lab,
Right.
generally speaking.
Right.
And so all of that material that used to be housed there is likely gone. But I don't know if I still have soil samples from this or not.
It would be
I
great if you
might.
did because I would like to see because whilst I've seen these iron spheres, I've never seen the SEM kind of structure of them, and it would be really good to nail down whether it's in the same family of
Right.
phenomena.
We did have a person that made the conjecture that this material, which Levingood, asserted was meteoritic in origin, he had the idea that perhaps it was actually fly ash being produced from coal-fired power plants. And so they when you look at them in a in sort of a chemical spectrometer, you get a very similar signature between them, and it's very difficult to separate out the difference between those two things. So I generally
I think
shy
the
away of
important thing is about
making that.
distribution here, isn't it? They're
Yes,
talking about the higher distribution and more so
that's
as you get to
exactly
the
right.
center of the features.
Yes. And so that's what we found here is that you end up with higher concentrations of this stuff in the soil deposited in the just the top, sort of quarter inch of the soil.
Yeah,
If you go any deeper than that, you don't see, the concentrations of that.
yeah.
And it's a bit like, well, is it the meteoritic rain coming down, or is it fly ash from, pollution that's raining down over everything? It's hard to say, but you end up whatever the higher electromagnetic fields are that are involved with producing the crop circles, it ends up concentrating that material within the area of the crop circle. And when you do, we would go out into the field at various distances away and take, control samples, and you would see that fall off occur, the farther out you went. So yeah, we would get higher concentrations
Yeah,
of that.
so what we find is that there was a paper, or sorry, a discussion published after we published in Nature Scientific Reports earlier in the year, where Shishkin was talking about his cavitator, and he found a large transfer of iron from one part of the vortical spinning thing into another, and we found that in the aluminium foil in ultra experiments, there are minute deposits of iron in the rolled aluminium foil, and that these are aggregated and they're then made into like a fluid and then end up in these iron-rich crenellated spheres, it would appear. So and we know from the Hutchison effect that it's able to pull the metal into the core. So these structures can end up with a fractal cores, and the cores themselves are intensely magnetic, and they can pull in these any ferromagnetic material and even paramagnetic like oxygen into the cores, so they can aggregate. So it's not necessarily in all cases that the synthesis of iron, but that it is pulling in iron from the environment. So it's largely irrelevant where it comes from. And ultimately we'll find it in the case of Malcolm Bendel, who's in the YouTube stream here. We find that on the inside or outside of the inside of his thunderstorm generator, there is steel being torn out of the metal and going
Mhm.
into iron-rich spheres, which also contain chrome and molybdenum or whatever is in that steel, same as in the steel knife of the Hutchison effect. But then on the inside of the outside, they're almost always these pure iron and oxygen ones, which Levengood assumed. Thank you, Black Tie, for your super chat. He assumed that because of the ratio, they were likely to come from a meteoritic origin. What I'm saying is, these structures have this beam of intense magnetic energy, or a focused beam that is able to. It's so powerful it can literally rip matter apart and condense it. And because the non-ferromagnetic or paramagnetic materials are not pulled into that magnetic core in the same way, it then, in my view, is separating it out into the oxygen, which is paramagnetic, and the iron, which is ferromagnetic, and the iron oxides of which are ferromagnetic.
Can I
Just
just
as a point, I'm
Yeah,
sorry, Andrew.
Andrew, you've just said something in the chat here. The link is
yeah,
on
so
the
I've just
page
got a
there.
question for Jeff while he's there. Nice to meet you, Jeff. Sorry, I was a bit
Yeah,
abrupt if I was a bit abrupt earlier.
that's okay.
So what we're seeing on the right-hand picture then, like those spiky looking objects, is that like a string of these iron-rich spheres then, or am I misunderstanding that?
No, that is correct. That's what that is.
Right.
And
And they're kind of
they're
stacked on top of
all
one
sort of
each other.
linked, connected together
Right.
magnetically. And so the sort of brown stuff is just other soil that was part
Yeah.
of the concentration there.
Right. So, because I mean, I've just seen a couple of these pictures from Dr. Well, yeah, he wasn't a doctor, was he? There was 11 Good's paper, And so I hadn't seen that picture before, so that's very interesting. Yeah, you're
Right.
right.
Well, um, what I would say, and this just as a point of clarification, this level of research that was being done was something of of an aside. It was not a focus of Levingood's research or anybody else's research. It was one of these things that we didn't know what we would find. Let's take some soil samples and see what we could find. And it would only happen in a handful of cases because in most cases, people were running around. We're most, sort of investigations of crop circles, people aren't doing any science whatsoever.
No.
In the few that were being done, most people were focusing on trying to get measurements of all of that, whatever the crop circle was, and not spending a lot of time doing any other science other than that. I can only think of probably certainly less than 20 and maybe less than a dozen that this kind of research was ever even done, where people actually took soil samples and actually looked at it carefully. And this is one that I participated in specifically, but that was not, a general main focus. So when I see that paper that the H glaze paper, so to speak, that Levingood put out, that was literally a one-off.
Right.
That was not really found in other crop circle formations. That sort of glaze has only been reported like maybe two or three times ever. It's not a generally seen thing, which is why they decided to focus on it and do a more specific investigation on that because it was so rare.
Well, it would
Um,
be
but
amazing if you can either go back to where the samples may have been most likely and see if you can recover some of those, or see if you've got some of the samples. Because,
yeah,
um,
so
go on.
just to clarify where the location of this is, they'd now have built a high school on top of
No, no, no,
this.
no. I'm talking about Levengood's laboratory or whoever may have
Oh,
been in charge of any of his materials. Obviously,
yeah,
don't
all
expect
his
to go there.
yeah. Yeah, I'll see if I still have additional soil samples from this. I might. Um I have a handful of samples of various things that I've kept over the years. I'll have to see if I can find it.
That would be
Uh
awesome because I would like to see if it's the classic FeO2 ratio, which we're finding in all these different systems, and it would appear to be the same kind of ballpark that Levengood was finding in that one example. And I wouldn't be so surprised because that Levengood, and this is very rare, is because what we find is that this is a continuum process. So it can start by, weakening Van der Waals forces and Casimir. It can go then on to weakening polar bonds rather, and then ionic bonds, and then covalent bonds and metal bonds, and so on, until it starts breaking atoms apart, and then it starts breaking nuclei apart. So it's a range of possibilities. Is it possible we could pause your presentation here? I know you want to
yeah.
follow on with a point here, but give Andrew Johnson the floor if he's ready.
Yeah, no, it's perfectly fine.
Yeah.
Let me
So
Yes, please.
let me
Yeah,
stop sharing here and
yeah. So
I'll share
okay.
my screen now. I shouldn't take
we'd
too
love your face
long.
back though, Jeffrey, please.
Yeah.
Let's I stopped the share, so but I'm
Just
not
need to do
seeing
your
my
video, I
video come
think,
back up. Let's see here.
on the video camera.
There we go.
There.
So given the fact you're working all the way back then, how do you stay so handsome?
Well, I started young, I guess. I think I'm a few years older than you.
Well, right. Okay.
Okay,
So so Andrew has books related to what we're discussing here, and he also has
sure.
books related to ball lightning. I think this is very important that he shares this with the community
I
tonight.
wanted to give like a sort of overview of where I'm coming from, to folks that might not be familiar. So I put this on first because this was integral to how Bob and I got in touch, really.
Yeah.
Not to beat the woods, but where did the towers go? And really, the subtitle on the cover says what the connection to crop circles is, really, which I'll get to in a few slides' time, really, as I understand it. And it ties into what Jeff and Bob were discussing just now, very much so. So there is no doubt that the World Trade Center was destroyed using some sort of directed energy technology, and the fingerprints of that technology, include things like iron-rich microspheres, as we understand it. And so I think there is a connection to the technology. There's a connection between the technology that they used to destroy the World Trade Center and the connection between the technology that has been used to make some underlined 50 times crop circles. So that is my contention. So I would then want to go from that to, I'll just, hopefully this will work if I click on it. Where did I get to? Just got to scroll down my list now. I'm going to jump around a little bit here. So if I go to that, right, you should be able to see that. So, I got into 9/11 research back in 2004, and I eventually got in touch with this fellow, Stephen E. Jones, and he invited me to join the Scholars Group. And I've written all about this in my two
But
books.
Stephen E. Jones, wasn't he the guy that was into muon catalyzed fusion, and he was the leading scientist reviewing Pons and Fleischmann? And wasn't it he that put his hand up when they said, who believes this is like pseudoscience or whatever? And the majority of the other people at the table in 1989 put their hands up, and that was the end of Martin Fleischmann and Stanley Pons.
Same guy, that's correct. So Jones was pushing this explanation of thermite being the destructive mechanism, and he still does this to this day. And so
Actually, can I interject there? Sorry again. Now that we know what we're looking at, when you're looking at this iron-rich crenellated microsphere, when it's not very smooth, and it has these kind of spiky ends to it, we know from Malcolm Bendel's material and from other material that, like in Binger and Huang's, where it actually has some other elements, it produces this non-perfect crenellations. So this, in my view, I've never said this before, but this will contain some chromium. And this will therefore be part of chromium or molybdenum, some other steel component. So this will be part of other steel rather than synthesized straight from a thermite reaction.
So to give you the sort of quick thumbnail of all of this, Jones claimed that thermite was used to destroy the World Trade Center, and that Dr. Judy Wood's research was a load of nonsense, and there was no such thing as a directed energy weapon. It couldn't possibly have done that. And as we see, this was in one of his papers that he co-authored with, I think, Niels Harriot and others, who's this Dutch chemist or Danish chemist. And this was back in, I don't know, 2008 or something, 2009, I forget the exact dates. But this is all in my blocks and everything. So I saw this, and I can't remember which order this came in. But then if I go to the next slide, we've seen pretty much something very similar to what Jeffrey was talking about. Because this is one of Dr. Levengood's, or Lucy Levengood's slides from the BLT research. And I'd seen this somewhere around the same time. And so I saw these iron-rich spheres allegedly in the World Trade Center dust, and according to Jones, who's this ex-cold fusion scientist, for want of a better term. And I sent this to Dr. Wood, and she ended up putting this in the Where Did the Towers Go book, which a bit to my surprise. And we talked about that round about 2009, 2010, I think early 2010, because the Where Did the Towers Go book came out at the end of 2010. And there were other things too, which I'll try and get to quickly without taking up too much time. And then I think I'd mentioned this to you, Bob, a while back, a couple of years ago. The next slide was with the Hesdalen lights. There were soil samples taken because I think one of these orbs had gone into the ground or something.
Yeah.
And there was this paper written by, I think, Erling Strand. The links are all at the bottom of the slide. And so there were these iron-rich spheres then. So this seemed to be a signature of some type of anomalous
so in this
energy
particular
change.
instance, it was they watched a ball lightning collide in Hesdalen with the ground. They went to the damaged piece of ground, and in sifting through that damaged piece of ground, they found this iron-rich sphere. Now, what you are looking at here is one that is probably of this FeO2 ratio, because it has this very pure crenellations rather than the spiky ones you saw in the possibly grabbed steel and put into little small balls, which we see in other examples, like in the thunderstorm generator. So everyone who's been following this story will be able to recognize the difference, but also the similarity in how one goes into the other between these two systems.
Yeah, and I mean, I sent you this, didn't I? Oh, 2 or 3 years
Well, we
ago, and
certainly
you were like,
discussed it. Yes, yeah,
yeah,
but
you really delved into it a lot more than I did. You really went into it a lot more, so that was good. Let me just see if I can go to my other slides again now. So that was that. So we're seeing this connection between the iron rich spheres, energy, the crop circle formation. But what I'm contending is that some of the crop circles are being produced by military technology, right? And I think really that I can now probably, and then yeah, we got the other thing that I noticed was that, for example, levitation was seen on 9/11. So if we see this, we've got, oh, this video is actually playing. I'm not sure if this will play. This, of course, is one of John Hutchison's levitation instances that was recorded, I don't know, in the 80s. I think this clip was maybe in the 1990s. Then we had the inverted cars, the inverted fire trucks on 9/11. We had Rennie Davila levitated. We had another guy lifted up. We had David Hansher. He was lifted up and carried a block. He was the New York Daily News photographer. So we had the levitation.
and
Okay.
interestingly, in that
And
car, what we identified is that, or rather, Judy did, was that cars that were the right way up were sometimes not toasted because they're sitting on insulating tires or
right.
something like that, and they get toasted when they're something like that, right, as I understand it.
Oh, so this was David Hansher. This is the guy that was lifted up and carried a block. I think you
Uh-huh.
might not hear this, but it doesn't matter. That's his testimony. So here's one that I got here. Michael Mako. This is from the 9/11 Witness Project. Michael Mako. I realized I couldn't get out from under the collapse. I dove under an ESU truck that was facing north on the west side of West Street. This is just after the tower had been destroyed, or during the destruction of the tower, actually.
Yeah.
I dove under that and waited for the building to come down. When the building did come down, I actually thought I was trapped and the truck was blown off me, pushed off me, I guess. It was not there. At that point, I was just really, really shocked and didn't know what was going on. So this truck actually blew off him, but he was okay. And I think there's another one. I won't go over
Wasn't
all
that
of
guy
these.
that actually fell down several stories and
Yeah, yeah.
slowly?
Pasquale Bozelli. There's many instances of a sort of anomalous, sort of levitation type effects. Uh, and then there's this account from Freddie Silver. He said he was lifted up while in a crop circle. This was after it had formed, and he said he had no idea how high up he went. There was another one. I don't know if it's on the next slide. Pat Delgado. He said that he was sitting in a crop circle and suddenly was levitated. When suddenly some force levitated me to a height just brushing the flattened crop and floated me to the east side of the circle. Now I was really feeling really scared. What force could have moved me a distance of about 3 meters while still in the same sitting position?
Hmm.
It was here I called Colin and the others to join me. So I was looking at all these phenomena and tying them together as, something is going on here. So that was that. Let's see. So I want to go back to my other whole selection of slides now. Then the other one that this, and Richard D. Hall alerted me to this. I've got a whole long clip here of filmed by Robert Hulse, and this Nautilus crop circle in the bottom left here. I've got another picture of that which Richard D. Hall alerted me to. This was at Pusey Vale or Pusey Hill in England, and I think in 2007 or 2008. But what's really interesting, you see this little area here. I don't know if you can see my pointer on the right. That
Yeah.
little circle.
Yeah.
That was actually somebody came in and walked and flattened that. Right now,
A
I've
very
got. I've
different
flipped to my
appearance,
other.
right?
Right, but it wasn't. What you'll see is if I get this up here, I might need to change. Can you see just the PowerPoint, or can you see a browser window on top of it
I
now?
can only see what you're screen
PowerPoint.
sharing, and I think you're screen sharing the presentation.
Right, so it's okay. What I've got to do now is do stop and restart. So I just want to
Yeah.
show this browser window. So let me just share that. Where are we? Here we go.
Whilst you're looking for that, I completely agree.
I've
This
got
is
it. I've got it.
demonstration of
I've got
military
it.
technology. That's what I
Thank you.
think my father was showing me in 1979. I have, no reason to think it's anything other than that, other than the very natural ones, like the one that I showed from Matsumoto's observations in the early
So,
90s.
so, so, so I think this is good evidence of something that went slightly wrong with what they were doing on this particular
I
formation,
see. So it's basically a flip
because
side, a fractal
well,
level.
it's flipped and
Yeah.
they've changed the scale of it.
Yeah,
and
it's
that
scale
was the bit that
invariant.
somebody came in and trampled down. There's probably a better picture of that because this is
Oh, well
slightly compressed.
done.
I don't have that in the PowerPoint, so I think Richard D. Hall alerted me after I'd done that PowerPoint, but I've got the links to that here, some archive.
Oh, that's
So
very
this looks
interesting.
like they were doing the formation,
Yeah,
and then but they did a little test of it first and did a small version, and then somebody actually came in and trampled that down, which is what that image is there, that one above it,
right.
right? So I'll go back to the PowerPoint now.
It might have been that they
Um,
just got their wires crossed on
who
the overall
knows? Yeah.
program pattern, and it just flipped it and shrank it. It was just too small, and maybe they thought they were overwriting with the big one, but they kind of missed it. I don't know. It's very interesting
Yeah,
though.
I mean, you could sort of argue it in several ways, but that was really interesting. And then I think just probably a couple more that I'd like to just
Of
because
course, it's showing the
this is
golden
it's,
ratio spiral, isn't it? So
I suppose, yeah. This is a very complex phenomenon. So my bag is that some people want to say, oh, it's all, my at the end of this presentation that I do, I say some people say it's all board stompers, Doug and Dave and all those guys that do all the hoaxing. We know it's not that.
yeah,
Some people say, oh, it's the aliens giving us messages and telling us
I
to,
don't think it's
it's time
that.
to transform
Honestly,
transform
sorry
our
for those that like
consciousness.
that story.
No, no. There could be an element of that. I don't want to dismiss that totally. But one thing that got me, I don't know whether Jeffrey would agree, that round in the build up to 2012, we had all this Mayan symbolism appearing in the crop circles in Wiltshire. This was in 2004, I think, this one, and there were others. So I've got a couple more in here. That was 2005. And then I think there's another one in 2005. So these are all like Mayan symbolism, which was a bit weird. That they should all be pointing to that. But
I
that
could make
people
a
were talking
comment
about
on the first one that you showed.
Guam,
The
that
first
one.
one that you showed there, that one was definitely constructed by people.
Okay,
I had a friend of mine that actually was sitting in it. It was constructed over the course of a couple of days, and he was sitting
right.
in it when the hoaxers came back the second day to finish it off. Um,
I've heard
so
Grumbled.
that that got added to. Yeah, yeah. Wow.
yeah, so
So
you have to be very careful when you
yeah,
identify some of these because at least for me, the idea that people are making them is a clear thing that has been demonstrated. There are people going
yeah.
out there and mimicking
Right.
the actual, real crop circles. And so, the ICCRA spent a lot of time developing certain kinds of tests to be able to discern the difference between ones that are being made by people and ones that aren't. Because I don't want to spend a lick of time, analyzing something like this if it's just made by people,
Yeah, yeah.
Right. I
Right
mean,
on.
but there's some other peculiar ones as well, like this one, which was Ed and Chris Sherwood. They were talked about this on a coast to coast thing. And this was really weird, where they had this Oliver's Castle formation in July 26th, 1994, and it had this sort of pattern here. And I think they argued that this was like a premonition of the impact of comet Shoemaker-Levy 9 on Jupiter, which left this impression in the Jovian cloud system. That was quite strange, and they call it. They've got this article called the Scorpius Hour, which fleshes all out. So that was really strange. I don't know what that was about. So that's one that people can look at because I'm looking at the whole thing rather than just the science of the mechanism of the energy that's being used to make these things. I think there's more to it even than just that. There was that one which is really interesting, and then you mentioned Bob. I did want to give you a slight correction to what you said on one of your live
Yeah,
streams
sure, great. That's the whole
last
point.
week. Kind of not. I mean, it's not that significant, but there was this Chill Bolton message in 2001
Yeah, and the other one
where
was
it
in
was
2000, wasn't it? Or something.
yeah, I think there was there was a bit of this pattern
The bit at the bottom with the
repeated.
communication technology. The bit that's actually on my
Right.
wedding ring.
Yeah. So this one, yeah, that was in 2001, and then this was
Yeah.
in 2002. So we had the Arecibo response, which included a lot more because if you look at the 1974 message, it shows the little human being, and then this radar. This is meant to be a representation of a radar dish or something, and this is then the DNA spiral and stuff. Um, And that, you know, there's articles going into a lot more detail than I've got time to go here.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
this
yeah.
again was
They're
really
quite easy
strange.
to
There's
find, to be
something,
honest. Yeah.
yeah, there's something really strange going on here. You know, to me, it's some type of psychological operation going on with the military. I don't know exactly what. Let's
But
see. So,
from my point of view, the bottom, I had before I ever saw the physical evidence and repeated, and then found out the Soviet energetics, and then the West people knew it. It was what led me down the fractal toroidal minimum two order structure. It helped guide me, and so I don't know whether that was deliberate to put it there, but it is a form of communication technology, and based in the fact that the toroidal moment communication
yeah,
technology was patented in 1993 by Hal Puthoff. This was 2001, so you know they've got plenty of time to go. Oh, there's the patent that's
yeah,
explaining it is this structure, and Hal's very clear at the beginning of last year when he's talking to Weinstein about these toroidal moment structures having these non-radiating boundaries and so on. And that he's got communication patterns based on it. So it's like about how consciousness interacts with the Akashic record, and how he finished the psychic spy program in terms of running it day to day and handed it over to Science Applications International Corporation in 1992, the year before he applied for that communication patent based on the toroidal moment. He doesn't mention the toroidal moment because that was 1993, but the toroidal moment wasn't verified in the West until 1997. But it is it's the minimum. That patent, the drawing that he has, is the electrodynamics of something that would need to create a toroidal moment.
yeah. So anybody that's listening, I recommend they look into Science Applications International Corporation, because this may come as a shock to some of the audience, but they were one of the defendants in Dr. Judy Wood's court case based on the fraudulent report
Really?
that SCIC coordinated in producing in 2005 about the destruction of the World Trade Center. So, you know, that's another thing for folks to look into if
But
they've not
weren't
looked
they
into it.
managing the removal of the steel?
No, it wasn't them, and that was somebody else. But they were coordinating the reports, and they
Okay.
also ran SCIC ran psychological operations in Iraq,
Right.
in the Gulf War. So they in other words they run psychological operations, which we think they put that giant flag up at the World Trade Center site. We can't prove that, but
Right.
you know. But this one I also wanted to mention because this is this huge complex formation. Maybe Jeffrey's got something to say about this, but I'll just say a few words about this. And this I discussed this with Paul Vigay before his sad passing in whenever that was, 2011. I was lucky enough to meet him in 2006, and he just thought, oh, this was a hoax, and his logic being that it was so complex that and it's so weird. It's like people often say, you know, why don't the aliens, if they're making these crop circles, why don't they just write in English? You know, why do they have to put all these weird, you know, old symbols and stuff and algebra and stuff like that? Well, apparently this is what they did with this formation. It's got a binary coded message, and Paul Vigay worked this out. You know, him being an IT expert and so forth, and
It was something like
Yeah,
the triangles
I
with
had
the
some
end of words,
discussions
weren't
with
they?
Paul about this.
right, right.
I talked to Paul about this too, and I would agree with Paul that this was likely made by people.
Yeah, I think it was probably was made by people, but I don't think it was done by stomping planks. I think it was much more sophisticated than that. And I'll mention I think I don't know if I've got the
From my
slide in this
perspective, it doesn't
presentation.
really matter because what my father showed me in
No,
1979, I believe, was definitely made by people using military technology that I only found out existed last year, but was
yeah,
sent to NASA in 1979. Right? So,
yeah,
like,
yeah,
and Kapitsa, when you understand what Kapitsa is saying, he's saying that interfering those fields will create the ball lightning. We know the ball lightning have been observed in some of these observations. We know that the ball lightning aggregates iron from the environment. So you're getting everything lining up, and I think by the end of tonight, things are going to become very clear. Thank you. Please carry on.
yeah. So, and of course, just the balls of light. There, as Jeffrey, I'm sure will agree that they're often seen in the formation of circles. But there seemed to be some sort of psychological operation going on with this, because if you there were two versions of that message that were circulated when it was decoded, and I put those there. and I think Linda Moulton Howe, she circulated one version, and Maurice Osborne, who I briefly corresponded with, he circulated another version. Now, I'm not sure if I've got the slide here of his. No, I haven't. So I communicated with Maurice Osborne when I was writing that acknowledged book, which I've put the link in the chat if anyone wants to download. It's free PDF. And what he did was they did their own version of this circle, and they basically did the same method where they wrote out a message, encoded it in binary, and then board stomped a circle like this. And I've got a picture of that in my book, which either he sent me or it was on a web page somewhere. And it said that it took him about I think it took 4 people 5 days to do it, or something like that. It certainly wasn't just a quick overnight job. So that was interesting, that it gave an indication of how long it would take to make such a thing, just with board stomping and planking and strings and stuff. So there was that. Probably throw that in. But another element I think I'll try and throw in here. I think that's probably the main one. But there's a couple more. When I was researching all of this, I came across this thing, and this seemed to be one of these instances where encoded messages were being passed within mainstream media. And this was a UK Daily Telegraph website about a fictitious terrorist attack on London called Operation Blackjack. And it actually had an embedded encoded message. So it was a slideshow, like mini PowerPoint thing, and it was done like a comic book thing with this alleged nuclear attack on London by terrorists. And one of the things was this passport or pass card or something, ID card of this citizen of North America. And I checked this as well. That long number is actually a set of ASCII codes. It's hex
Right.
codes, and you put it into all of these encode and decode web pages, and it comes out as this is not simply entertainment. And that was an encoded message in that. And they took that slide down as well. They took that out, but I think I managed to retrieve it.
So what you're suggesting here is that the CIA or intelligence agency used this as a kind of way of cryptically encoding a message in a slide, but this was already done in the 2002 Chilbolton or 2001.
Exactly. I was just seeing a similar pattern. I'm not saying it is that, but it
just
looked
for
like
people who
some
couldn't
sort of
follow the
similar.
big link, Andrew Johnson's
Yeah.
link, I've just made a bit.ly. It's bit.ly/cc-andrewj, and you can download his crop circle PDF.
So that was a weird one, and I just want to kind of go to right. So I'll go to Nick Pope now, because I mean the crop circle research field has been infiltrated, just like most of the other research fields, in my opinion. And this is what Nick Pope said. But it's sort of following on from what Bob and I both kind of said. Really, he posted this in November or December 2002. I haven't got the exact date because this was copied onto another website, which I think then this original page went down. But Nick Pope said he had to refute the bizarre idea that the formations were caused by the testing of, and listen to how specific this is, space-based laser or directed energy weapons, and dispel suggestions that media coverage of the issue has been stifled by the use of D notices. Why did Nick Pope need to do that? What was his problem? Why can't people just talk about it?
So here's the thing about that, because a lot of people misconstrue the term directed energy weapons. They think the energy is being directed into a position, from in a beam, literally like a space-based laser. And this is, in the minds of people, how they get confused. If you actually look at the Lockheed Martin systems and methods for generating coherent matter waves, they separate a particle beam or a beam of coherent matter from directed energy weapons. Directed energy weapons are where you can package energy, you can deliver it to a target, and then you can direct how the energy is delivered. And this is what you can do with ball lightning. You can make it turn metal to jelly, you can make the thing explode, you can make it turn to lightning and cause death and mayhem in a range of different ways. You can cause munitions to blow up. You could, for instance, cause lithium to blow up, specifically lithium-6.
So really, I just wanted Dan to go to sort of put in that energy thing a bit more, and this is what really, to me, the intelligence services are most interested in suppressing discussion of: A, the energy connections such as you've been bringing out, Bob. And the biggest no-no of all is the weaponization of those things. I mean, even Ashton Forbes, who's been doing all this MH370, will not discuss the weaponization of the technology he's talked about on 9/11. And here's another example related to that, not Ashton Tate, but this is going back to Bruce Palmer and then back to Colin Andrews in a minute. So Bruce De Palma was the inventor of the end machine, and you can find all this, everywhere. He said that he'd been threatened by Edgar Mitchell, who said that he offered him $30,000 for his end machine device, and Bruce De Palma turned it down. And never was any doubt. The end machine was a free energy machine the government was looking for. And if I tried anything on my own in California, I would have my head blown off. And the CIA warned me via Mitchell that I should not leave the country because I would be kidnapped. This was back in 1980 when these efforts frightened me out of going to Hanover, Germany, for Dr. Nieper's first gravity field energy conference, where Pamaranza Tawari brought his end machine from India and got the prize for the most clearly observable free energy from to date. Mitchell admitted that he worked for the CIA, admitted that in the Uri Geller documentary. We know that he worked for the CIA. He was involved with Putov and the psychic spies that Bob's already mentioned.
About Putov, Russell Targ had said last year he's a US naval intelligence as well, and that was the first time that was released by Russell Targ.
We have a recording of Mitchell saying to Bart Sabrell, or his son saying, "Shall we call the CIA?" and having waxed, threatening to shoot Bart Sabrell, or his son threatening to shoot him. So we know that Mitchell has essentially threatened the lives of two people, okay? And he became the darling of the UFO movement because he spoke out saying that, they got a crash at Roswell and they rescued stuff from it. And Mitchell was pretty sketchy on the details, unlike some other people. But Mitchell basically was a gatekeeper. He worked for the CIA, admitted that. But then, for example, when I tried to point this out to Colin Andrews, let's see. My friend, Apollo 14 astronaut Edgar Mitchell, has passed away 85 years of age, so I enjoyed my time with him. This is Colin Andrews on his Facebook. And I said, a shame he suppressed important truths. I've collated that information on my website if anybody wants a link. People don't seem to realize he wasn't, by his own admissions and statements, the person they thought he was. And then Andrews wrote, I'm surprised and actually rather shocked that you should make such unsubstantiated and repugnant statements about Edgar, a brave and intelligent, blah, 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 blah. So my point here is that we have proof that Mitchell was not who he said he was. He was involved with, he even had this thing called Quantrek, which was another free energy initiative like Stephen Greer's non-starter free energy initiatives. And Colin Andrews is defending him. He doesn't turn around and say, oh, I've never seen this, Andrew. Thanks for that. That really troubles me. He's having a go at me for claiming that I'm posting lies about Mitchell. Well, I'm not. I'm posting the truth. So, it's all extremely murky, really, and it's a lot more. There's a lot more to it, a lot more complexity, a lot more people involved in the crop circle phenomenon. And yeah, I think it's great what you're doing with the science side, Bob, and linking this all to these other things. And I think it's really important you're doing that. But those are just a few things I wanted to lay out. You can find this full presentation online somewhere. People can go to checktheevidence.com, use the contact button on there, and I'll send you any links and links from this PowerPoint and stuff if you want them. So really,
yeah, sure. And before you go, how much time have you got?
No, I can stay a bit longer, but that's pretty
okay.
much all
I'll
I
ask
to say for now.
The YouTube have got some questions. I'll ask them to ask their questions now of Andrew Johnson. Just so you know, you can get his information on crop circles at bit.ly/cc-andrewj, as you can see on the YouTube stream here now. It's in the chat for Jeffrey. Jeffrey, whilst people are asking thinking about what they want to ask Andrew Johnson, do you want to pose some comments to Andrew or some corrections or insights you may have?
Well, one thing immediately comes to mind. You are both mentioning quite a bit about technology that was developed, let's say, post 1970-ish. But we do have records of crop circles that go back much, much earlier than that. And so this is a phenomenon that transcends that technological development, before your lifetime, my lifetime. And so there is a deeper phenomenon that we need to recognize. For instance, I did a multi-hour presentation a couple years ago about the crop circles that were reported in the federal government documents of Project Blue Book. That the Air Force was going out and documenting various crop circles in association with all these UFO investigations. So we have photographs, we have documentation that at least goes back into the 60s and the 50s, but there are also historical reports, even some scientific ones that date back into the you know couple hundred years ago. I mean, there was the Oxford scientist Robert Plot, who wrote in the Natural History of Staffordshire about a whole bunch of crop circles, in and around Staffordshire. You have the spectroscopist that wrote a paper that was published in Science magazine in the 1880s. You can find records of that online. So there are a whole range of historical sources for
Yeah,
this.
we mentioned
People
some
are
of those
just
in the
Can I
trying
just
crop
add
to
circle
one
one.
thing
grapple
Go
as
on,
with
go
it,
on, Andrew.
Jeffrey? Yeah, so
What's
just
that?
one thing, because I did, there was, I think not ever so long ago, probably about 10 years ago, there was somebody had done they put all the aerial photography from the 1940s online. And I think there was somebody that
Yeah,
had found the crop circles from in 1940s aerial photography, and it was like there was like a Google Earth. It wasn't quite
right.
Google
I
Earth. It was
remember
like
seeing
that, but it was
that.
from the 1940s. Yeah, so I agree. I totally agree with you, Jeffrey. That it does go way back, and
And and
there's
and
records
it's
from before the
just to be
70s. Yeah.
clear, some of it is not just simple circles that are being found. I looked at one particular case from 1964 in South Dakota, in which there were 27 circles reported in the field with some associated geometry to it. That was one of those Project Blue Book investigations. They dismissed it and don't even have a case file on it, although there are records on it in their collection of material. They consulted with a meteorologist. The meteorologist said it was nothing but dust devils that created all the circles. And so they did not generate a case file for it. They just dismissed it out of hand. But the idea that we just have to recognize that there are reports of circles around the world that date back earlier than this more recent development of the technology that you're talking about.
Yeah, so I spoke about the one from the 1600s. I spoke about the science publications. Uh, the ball lightning, I think, goes back even further as an observation. And so,
Sure.
yeah,
Yeah.
if ball lightning can or is related to this phenomenon, then you can imagine that these things have been going on for time immemorial. It's just no one was
Right.
producing printed documents. I think the
Yeah.
1600s one was actually, and I have actually done this. It's like a woodcut print. I did that in art at school. So
That's a separate one.
yeah,
Hmm.
so but that was one of the earliest ones, and before the printing press, then there's oral traditions, and you wonder how long, when there's no communication and people are in their own communities, and they just see something weird in the field. It might just be a local story that dies along with the people after a couple of
Right.
generations. So I call this eternal technology, and I think the understanding of how this technology manifests itself naturally in nature was mastered. I think it was mastered probably around 1940s, and I think the deep understanding came much later with the toroidal moment. But it didn't matter. You could do it with scalar interferometry, and yeah, I think Kapitsa already understood this because the Russians at the time at Kapitsa was, which we'll see in this 1950s paper, he was talking about this, what might have been causing ball lightning. In fact, the paper I think is 1955. And so, everyone was racing to understand how electrodynamics works, and fantastic, incredible work in Kapitsa's work. And obviously, he was thinking about superfluidity as well. And these are important concepts with this. I think around that time, most of these technologies, from a military perspective, were understood in both sides of the pond, and most of the effort has been put into disinformation and psyops since. I mean, they've spent more effort
Well,
doing that than they have actually discovering these things and making technologies from them.
yeah, I could comment also on that
Go
if
on.
you want.
Yeah, sure.
Um, the ICC area has had several run-ins with the military at various crop circle sites. And so we even, for a short period of time, had a weird sort of back channel communication with at least one member of a team of in the U.S. military that was going around and investigating crop circles like we were going around investigating crop circles. And because we crossed paths, then, it was kind of an unusual situation. If I could share my screen real
Yeah,
quick, I
go
could
for
show
it.
a
You've
picture
got
of
the
that.
floor.
Let me see if I can.
Whilst you're doing that, I think the Lockheed Martin offered a vastly larger sum to Malcolm Bendall for his machine than poor the guy trying to hawk the N machine was being offered.
I'm
So I
not
feel quite
sure
sorry
how
for him.
I'm not sure how well this is coming out here,
It's
but
looking great here. Could you go full screen? Just present the presentation. Go
let's see if
presentation.
I can do it.
Yeah,
If that,
down the bottom,
um,
I guess.
let's say okay.
It's
How's
looking good
that?
from where I am.
Okay,
Yeah, that's great.
so
Oh no,
this is
no,
just
it's
one.
showing the wrong slide. It's
Oh,
showing your
was
this. You need to go to this settings for. Yeah, it's kind of showing your next slide and the previous slide.
there you go.
You're not seeing the
Oh,
presentation. We're not
this
seeing the
one,
presentation.
is that the
You
that I
need
think
to
this
you
is,
need to change the slideshow options to show in kiosk. If you quit the showing the presentation
yeah.
and then go up to I think slideshow. Go to
Uh,
slideshow like in the top middle.
yeah,
Yeah, and then I think there's an option to change it to show in kiosk mode or something, or
showing kiosk mode. I'm not
presentation mode or whatever. Oh, I don't know. Just run it in that
well.
window. That's fine.
untick use presenter view, untick use presenter view.
Yeah, that's right.
That, just on the monitor, just it says monitor, and just under that it says use presenter view top bar, and it's like
Under
just under where it says
monitors, above
automatic.
monitors, the word monitors.
Um, under
Keep going right,
monitor.
To the right, up,
and then
left,
Oh,
a
right.
bit further right.
I'm
Bit
not
left.
seeing what you guys are talking about.
Okay, there's a thing that
Well,
looks like a monitor, and then it says automatic to the
This
right
is
of the
word
word
monitor,
monitor,
yeah,
and below
and then
that it
just
says
under
use
that,
presenter view.
the presenter view. Oh, here where it says monitor.
just under that,
Down,
Use
yeah.
untick that, then go full screen with the Shift F5. That's it. You got it.
like that. Okay.
Yeah, but it's
Um,
still not showing. You need to share the wrong. You're sharing the wrong screen now.
Oh, I see. So let me do this. I have a second monitor. That's why if I unplug my other monitor and try that,
Oh,
let's
this
I
see
is
if
know you
that
can
works.
share it again. Just reshare the screen from the other
They're
one. Oh, that'll
beautiful,
do.
beautiful.
That's it.
Do
We
you have
got
that
it.
now? Okay,
Excellent.
I can't see what you guys are seeing. So what I'll just say is this is just one particular encounter that we had when we were investigating a crop circle up in Wisconsin. This crop circle was actually I witnessed forming. A gentleman by the name of Art Rentello watched the crop circle form over
Wow.
the course of about 12 seconds. The crop circle had some associated geometry to it. It happened during the passage of a storm front that was going through the area. When we got there to investigate it, is when we had the encounter with the military.
Right.
And first, they sort of observed us from a distance up on the hill there with a guy with binoculars. Then he drove down and walked into the crop circle. We actually talked to him directly. We had several flybys of a helicopter, and I just wanted to point out this series of photographs that I took of the flyby of the helicopter
Huh.
because all of us that were there were taking pictures of the helicopter. However, I was the only one that I had a polarizing filter on my lens on my Nikon,
Hmm.
and I was the only one that was able to photograph the ball of light that was flying around the helicopter while we were there. And I think it had something to do with the polarizing filter that I had. Uh,
Mhm.
but
Well, can I pause?
yeah,
When we have these clusters leaving traces on stainless steel produced in Amasa vibrator systems and in other systems, you can only see the tracks, the helical tracks that they produce when you use a polarizing filter.
Oh, interesting.
Carry on.
Oh, that's okay. So I'm just showing this as an example that we actually tried to get Freedom of Information Act requests about this flight, and we were able to learn that from this individual in the military that he, at least what he claimed, was that he was part of a special crop circle investigative unit that was operating out of Scott Air Force Base in Illinois. But they had originated their flight out of a National Air Guard base in Wisconsin. So we filed Freedom of Information Act requests about this material. And what we got back was kind of unusual. Scott Air Force Base sent us the direct line to Donald Rumsfeld's office at the Department of Defense.
Would be, wouldn't
And
it?
and we sent our request to that office, and they came back and said, well, those records are stored at the airbase. You have to go to the airbase for the records.
Oh, good
And
luck.
so it was like a circular thing. They just kept directing us around and around and around. We couldn't ever actually get the documentation. They just gave us, quite the runaround on that. But I I hesitate to go down this, road because it's not an an off like it's not an often encounter. It happens rarely, but there does appear to be at least some faction within the military that is interested in some of these from the perspective of they're trying to understand what's going on as well as we are. So maybe there's something else going on with some of these. Like I said, this one was, if I go back a slide or two,
So let me just get this correct. You said that you witnessed this yourself in how many seconds being formed?
not that I'm showing the picture of. This guy, Art Rantella, actually watched this crop circle happen
Right.
in the span of about 12 seconds. He saw the one in the far right, in that aerial photograph,
Yeah.
that single circle go down first. Then I'm sorry, the one to the far left is the one that he saw first. Then the one that's kind of shifted up a little bit to the upper right, that was the second one. And then the third one was the one in the center. And he saw one go down, second one go down, third one go down during this rainstorm as this massive front was coming through.
Yeah.
And said it took about 10 to 12 seconds. And I mean, I can show you, like, this is the view that he had from his window looking at the circles over on the left. His house is kind of to the upper right. And so that's his view. He saw one go down, then two go down, then three go down in the span of this animation that I'm showing.
Right.
And, you know, there was a lot of other sort of randomly downed areas in the field as well, which you can see in this photograph. A lot of other sort of flat, patchy stuff went down. But we found a whole range of anomalies. These actually twisted the tops of a lot of the wheat in this photograph, which is unusual to happen.
And did you
We
find
did
the anomalies
see-
there, the classic anomalies that meant that this was?
Yes. So I just put that picture up so you can see the blown nodes there, and we found higher concentrations of the magnetic particles. You can see that on the magnet there.
Yeah.
We did do a whole range of tests to confirm that this guy was not just making it up. And so we thought that and Art Rantella was telling the truth. It was a really unusual case, and while we were there doing that investigation is when we had the military encounters. So, that's just part and parcel of, doing these investigations, I think.
I could just may add on to that, of course, for those that are not familiar, I'm sure Jeffrey is, but of course, Colin Andrews had this big, ongoing relationship with the military in relation to Operation Blackbird in 1990, when they ran this thing for about 2-3 weeks, and they had uniformed military officers, in on the fields with them and trying to film these things forming. And then there was this incident where they had video cameras set up overnight. The camera captured something, and of Colin Andrews got to hear about this, but then he went to collect the tape. The tape was blank, and somebody had swapped the tape over. And Colin Andrews has spoken about this. So, we know that the military is interested in this, and whether, what I was thinking when Jeffrey was talking was really, it sounds like there's black ops, on these USAPs, or whatever you want to call them, these unacknowledged special access programs. They're going on, as we speak, probably. And then you have the regular military that sees these things forming, and they want to come and find out what's going on in these USAPs, perhaps, or what they can see that there's something they've got a hint of from somewhere, and they think, well, why are we seeing that in a crop circle? That looks like the same technology, so let's go and have a look at it. Maybe it's something like that. In other words, you've got these levels of the military, the lower level guys that maybe the ones that Jeffrey encountered and the ones that were working with Colin Andrews for a period of time. They don't really know about what you're talking about, Bob, all the technology and the patents and everything, and the sort of backstory.
Yeah, they're just data gathering, and maybe they're actually data gathering for how did the operation go in this field, and is anyone looking at it, type thing.
Yeah, maybe they're doing intelligence, passing that back, and the Black Ops are obviously watching what they're doing, and
we think that after we had this encounter. We think that the military actually physically made one. They went out and stomped down another one, and they were testing to see what our reaction was to it. Because we went in and investigated this other one. They sort of, in this back channel communication, indicated, what did we think of this other one? And we were there 15 minutes and figured out it was man-made. The second one that we went and looked at in this area. But it's hard to know for sure. Some of this is very slippery information to try to understand. But one of the things that we did was we actually looked at 5 different crop circles in this region within a 2-week period of time, and the one that they asked us specifically to comment on was one that we knew was for sure man-made by somebody. And so that's why we thought that, well, maybe they're testing us to see if we can tell the difference. But when I went back, when I asked them, hey, which one of the 5 are you asking about? And they had not known of these other ones that we went and looked at. That was not part of their knowledge base. And so, they don't have all the answers. They don't know everything, and it seemed at least this group was struggling to understand what it was.
Well, perhaps I can share something which actually got me into merging several of these concepts about 6 years ago. If I can share that, I've just provided the link. If you just want to go and have a look at the direct link, it's called bit.ly/HessBob, and that article was on my Steemit then. UFOs over Hessdalen, Norway explained, ball lightning and low energy nuclear reactions. And if I'm going to try and share it because I want to talk about a particular aspect in this, so let me see if I can find that. Okay, so hopefully you should see my desktop here, and actually, that's probably not the way to do that. I'm going to do the log here. Okay, right. So I should be able to drag this up here. Okay. Can you see this blog article here?
Yep, we can see that now.
Okay, right. Yeah, so this should see it on Zoom. So basically, this is in Hessdalen. It's one of the areas in the world that has the highest amount of long-lived luminous objects in the sky. And the guy from the Slack in California, David Freiberger, he actually gave the inaugural address for the first ball lightning meeting here. And he was the person in 2009 that, when trying to explain a 2001, 2002 or 3 balls glowing in a superconducting chamber in another national lab, he came up with extending the Maxwell equations and came up with this diality angle that would explain this fractal toroidal kind of arrangement that would end up explaining the destruction of matter. And so this ball lightning produced these kind of traces that you see here. And these are very similar to the traces that we've observed as strange radiation traces. Anyway, what I'm referring to here is that during, I think, 2000 here, in explaining the phenomenon may be similar to the proposed model. So basically, in 2002, no, sorry, this is blah, blah, blah. I think it was in 2000, there was a model put forward by Abrahamson and Dennis about how ball lightning forms, and it explains it here, and you can go and see it. But there was this guy who you see in this image. I actually took this video in Skinner when it was running at the University of Missouri. And what happened when they'd managed to shut down cold fusion. But what happened is there was a 60 Minutes, when 60 Minutes was worth watching, in 2009, when they said, is cold fusion hot again? And it came out, and then what happened was this guy, Sidney Kimmel, or rather his foundation, donated a load of money to University of Missouri to set up the Sidney Kimmel Institute of Nuclear Renaissance. And what they tried to do is gather anyone who was leading in the field of cold fusion and pull them into the University of Missouri. And they flew in this guy called Dr. Graham Hubler to oversee the process. And apparently this was all going to be done for the greater good, and everything was going to be published. But if you rewind to 2000 or 2001, the BBC were asking for someone in the world to comment on this Abrahamson and Dennis model of ball lightning. And they, for some reason, went to Dr. Graham Hubler of the United States Naval Research Laboratory, who has taken a keen interest in lightning balls, saying that the research has much promised. I've followed the theories that have come out over the years, and few can explain all of the features of ball lightning. This one, however, unifies an awful lot of the properties of ball lightning under one theoretical umbrella, so I think it stands very good chance of perhaps being correct. It's not necessarily the whole story, or even the story, but the nice thing about it is that it came to be tested experimentally. That it can be tested experimentally, then we'll know whether this theory has any merit in the future. My point being is that the US Navy research labs is like the biggest research lab. They do the most important work as far as I can work out. How put off is US naval intelligence? This guy for the last several years has been running interference papers at the ICCFs. So at ICCF 23, he published a paper that said exotic vacuum objects are nothing more than Coulombic explosions, which is one thing they can do. It's a textbook limited hangout. And then in the next year in ICCF 24, he did another one and said it's just plastic deformation, like a shape charge, and that's how they can go through and punch holes in things. Again, I don't know who were the peer reviewers of this. I don't know who allowed this paper to just go straight into the Journal of Condensed Matter Nuclear Science, because I don't know anyone else in the field that studied ball lightning and in the Western field, ball lightning and exotic vacuum objects as much as I have, that's alive. And he's connected. So the military here are admitting, through one of their leading researchers at US Naval Labs in 2000, when this theory came out about how ball lightning are formed, that they have been studying it for a long time and they're very interested in it. And of all the people on planet Earth, the BBC asked for an opinion on this. It happened to be this guy, who it was wheeled in to oversee the Renaissance in cold fusion research after it got a little bit of attention in 2009. I kind of rest my case. There's a continuous line of the US Navy. Now, bearing in mind, it was my father knew people in the British Navy. I believe it was people in the British Navy more than people in the Masonic Order, of which he was very high up. I bet it might have been both. I think it was those people that showed us the technology in 1979 from Shore and Mayfield. And so I think this is an old technology, and it is the biggest secret that exists in the US military. And the things that you can do with it are literally look like magic on several different levels. And so that's my commentary when it comes to the military involvement with ball lightning and ball lightning related phenomena.
I'd just make one additional comment
Hmm.
around that. One of the early books that was written about crop circles that has largely gone overlooked by a lot of researchers is a book called Round in Circles by a guy by the name of Jim Schnabel. Andrew, have you read that book? Have you seen that book? Or do you know who
No,
Jim
I haven't,
Schnabel was?
Jeffrey. I've heard the name, but I've not read or seen the
Okay.
book.
Track that book down and read it. It's an enlightening book. Jim Schnabel participated in one of the early crop circle creation contests that was held by the original group that was studying crop circles over in England in like 1991-ish, that time frame. And he took second place in creating his own crop circle. Well, he spent a year or two ingratiating himself with just about every one of the various groups that were investigating crop circles around in England, and then documenting and trying to expose all of the flaws that they had, and then wrote this sort of expose tell-all book about all of the bad things that all of these different researchers were doing. And it turns out that Jim Schnabel worked for the CIA,
Oh,
and
okay.
he was sort of infiltrating most of these groups. So, people like Colin Andrews and Pat Delgado, he worked with them for a while. Terrence Meaden and his Toro group, he worked with them for a while. And he just would go around and
Mm,
like you know
data
get on their good
gathering.
side, and then he wrote this trashy book, just destroying all of those people's reputation. I think the book
Yeah,
came out in 93, if I'm not mistaken, maybe 94. But it was an early effort at that. But I also would make a comment, this if you want to read a really good book that about the idea of ball lightning and its relationship with crop circles, that would be this book. This is a pretty
Hmm.
rare one to find. I don't know if you can see that.
Circles
Circles
from
from
the
the
circles from the
sky.
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 Hmm.
This was an edited book by George Terrence Meaden, the atmospheric physicist who wrote the first book on crop circles.
Hmm. Hmm.
And they held a conference at Oxford University in 1990. Let's see if I can find the date. I think it was 91, or maybe 1990. And they brought researchers together from around the world, experts in ball lightning, experts in vortex dynamics, and they gave a whole range of papers about this. People from Japan, people from the United States came, and then immediately upon the end of this conference is when the Doug and Dave sort of big thing
Uh,
hit the media, and
yeah, that sounds coordinated to me.
it torpedoed the scientific community's efforts in investigating this material for, it's been like 25, 30 years almost. Most scientists won't touch it with a 10-foot pole. And it happened right after Meaden's conference on this. And all of these scientists basically, they were just all shut down as a result.
Yeah,
But there are some very interesting papers in that collection of stuff that talks about the vortex dynamics and plasma vortices and ball lightning associated with it. These were people that were generating ball lightning in a lab, and I think one of the Japanese researchers had noticed that there were geometric patterns that were forming in dust along electrified rails in the subways in Japan. And so he began to study that phenomenon. He reproduced this in the lab and began to, with, I think it was like every like roughly 100th ball that he got dropped down into, the dust, it would generate a pattern. And then he would, every 500th one, you would get, a more different
It's
geometric
more
pattern.
self-organizing than that. That like if you look at
Yeah.
typically you get two, three, four, five, six. Don't see a lot of sevens. You get eights, and then all the way up to 48. But then when you get up to about eight, you start to see substructures forming inside, and it's not like sand on a soundboard. but it is kind of like patterns of standing waves that are in there. And if you can
Right.
imagine, you have interfering electromagnetic waves. They're going to create, and depending on how many there are and how many reflective surfaces, you're going to get effectively those electromagnetic waves interfering and leading to resonant nodes on there. But the actual structures themselves, they form these regular structures. And there's the book that was a key reference of Ken Shoulders, but I think it was done by the Bell Laboratories or whatever. It worked from about 1932 on vacuum arc discharges, and if you go and look at my Sochi presentation in 2018, I showed where what this one researcher did, and forgive me, I can't remember his name offhand, but you can go and see it referenced in the book, in the slides. He showed that there was a single spot in cathode arc spots, then two spots effectively arranged around a ring, but they're just two spots, let's say, so you can't really define a ring between them very easily, other than by the diameter. And then there's three spots, and then four spots, and then five spots, but they're all equidistant. So it's a case of like likes like, and they're attracted to each other, but they're also repelled, but they tend to form these rings. There was no explanation for it, but this has been known. I think that book was published in 1970. So when electrical discharges hit and the an anode and a pattern is formed, it tends to arrange itself into these. Actually, it's for the cathode spot, so it's coming from the cathode. So this is the actual charge clusters forming. They're actually forming these regular spaced arrays. And of course, we've seen it in our experiments, but of course, it was seen in the work of Bostic when he was investigating plasmoids. And he was trying to force the situation by bringing in rings from regular distances. And he didn't know at the time, and maybe he never knew, but he was forming toroidal moment structures from the very first two structures coming together.
Yeah, I think that what you're seeing and what we're seeing in crop circles, these or the people that we're seeing the electrical discharges creating patterns in dust or whatever, it's all the same sort of range of phenomenon. It's just that whatever the material is that is leaving the trace of it behind,
Yeah.
that's what we're all examining. That it's the trace. The crop circles is just a trace of an energetic phenomenon that is
Yeah.
occurring,
I mean,
and it's just the
these things.
medium of the crop that is left there behind, right?
Yeah, these things are scale invariant, and they can also be projected. And so, I think it was fantastic, that example that was shared by Andrew earlier, where you had the inverse of the not ammonite, but the same thing, Nautilus, because we actually found, and to bring it back to this opening slide of Andrew Johnson, in a deuterium nickel diamond experiment conducted by the late Neil Crichton Gould. He called himself Lion as a code word until I was given permission to release his name after his passing. But he had these reactors which produced cold fusion effects. It produced these regular array of like 2 spiral arm, 3 spiral arm, 4 arm structures, 5 arm structures. But what he did when he turned these reactors off, he found that if he put them cold into a biscuit tin with X-ray film, it would expose the X-ray film with typically 2 spots, like a solar prominence was punching through the X-ray film and coming back down. But the other thing that it produced in at least one of the X-rays was this particular shape. And it was the first time I saw it. And then I saw the same shape etched into the fused quartz, which normally melts at 1700 degrees C. And we do not see the temperature above 1050 degrees C in the data. And it's outside of the core of the reactor that's heating, and the glass around this structure is perfectly undamaged, whereas it's this sort of shape like this. It's kind of like a triangle, like the subterranean level in the Great Pyramid, but also like the areas affected by the 1992 coherent matter nuclear reactor of M. Solin. Well, this particular structure, with all of its vortices structures, you can overlay that on ground zero, and all of the substructures are the punch holes through the top of the building to the ground zero, and all of there's even curved sections, there's slice sections. So I shared this in a video a number of years ago on an anniversary of 9/11. I did a video with Andrew, and this is a scale invariant process. So if the electrodynamics produces this in several other people's work, and we can replicate this at will, and we already know in this structure it literally causes, it would appear, an intense flux of some fluid, superfluid material that can penetrate through material and disrupt electron bonds, make that fall apart and aggregate and go into flux loops. But it actually quantizes in substructures that are very discrete. And perhaps if I would share, I think this is quite important, if I could share this with you, this particular X-ray image, and the correlation with ground zero, and the correlation with the subterranean level in the Great Pyramid, and the correlation between what we can produce at will in a plasma reactor, and the correlation with the awarded patent to Solin for a quantum coherent nuclear reactor. And I would ask you, with your expertise, Jeffrey, if you can look to see if there's been any demonstrations of crop circles in this form, because I think probably there might be. And so, and when you know that this is something that is able to cause copper to fall apart, to cause tungsten to fall apart, literally the matter is separated. It's funny because DARPA have actually got a request out right now for technology to cause force alpha decay of decay nuclei, and it would probably work for that because it seems to force tungsten to fall apart into at least triple alpha carbon. I think this is a technology which would force the water to fall apart. It would cause the stems at the most water consistent area to become flaccid, for it to just flop over and follow this dark matter flow. And when the dark matter flow ceases, you're going to get them effectively freezing back into place in the same way that happened with the Hutchison effect. It's a jelly, you move the fields around, the thing shifts around, you turn off the fields and they're frozen in place. It's like you've just stopped the way that the electrons are interfered with something that is flowing through the matter.
Yeah, if I could share a slide or so.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
Let me see if I can hit that share again. Let's see if I can get this up here. Do you see that or not?
Perfect. Yeah, see it perfectly.
Okay, so this is a slide that I put together probably 25 years ago, in which this sort of demonstrates the range of possibilities that we see in crop circles. There are the geometrically complex ones, which everybody likes to, spend a lot of time examining. But there are these arrangements of circles and rings. There are just single circles, but there are also these non-geometric, randomly down ones that we've spent a lot of time in the United States looking at carefully. A lot of farmers call it lodging. A lot of farmers have demonstrated that if they overspray fertilizer on the crops, the seed heads get too hot, too big, and that destabilizes the plant and they can fall over in rainstorms and stuff. But there is also this effect, and we see all the same characteristics that we see in all these geometric patterns with the blown nodes and the, raised electromagnetic fields that we can detect and all this stuff. We see that in these non-geometric ones. And they have elements of that geometry in them. Depending on where you're walking in there, you can see the geometry like attempting to form. But there was something that almost interfered with the production of the geometry. You can see in the sort of aerial shot above, it almost looks like a chain of circles, but it's sort of been messed up. I kind of liken it to listening to a radio station slightly out of tune. That there's some interference that breaks down, and you don't get the nice geometry. there's a lot of researchers in England in particular. They don't even pay any attention to these at all.
Right.
They just say, yeah, this nothing. But they I do think that it is related to the phenomenon, and you can see a whole range of possibilities. I mean, it's nearly infinite. We very rarely see the same sort of patterns repeat, with the exception, I would say, of quintuplets. Quintuplets have repeated in various configurations, five circles on the dice, different sizes of the circles and spaced apart, but those quintuplets over and over and over again, like the first one that your dad
Yeah.
took you to see.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but outside of that, we don't often see repeated, geometry, which you would think, why is that not the case? Why aren't we not seeing repeated geometry if there's, so many different things? But to your point, I think that we probably have seen something like what you're describing. It's just a matter of putting our finger on which one it was.
Yeah, I think if I was a military and I had this technology pretty well mastered, and of course you're still having to contend with the natural phenomenon occurring, which may account for some of these ill-formed circles or just downed crops. You would probably want to deliberately use it to make things that look ridiculous, just from the point of view of discrediting the whole field. I mean, when you're thinking about, you're getting into a room and you go, right, some people went out and showed this technology to the world, right? And now we need to kind of like undo that and discredit. That would be one of the tools you came up with. You would actually go out and make more crop circles that have the same phenomena going on, but you would make them look ridiculous, like some of the man-made ones.
Right. I also wanted to show this particular photo of the effects of plants that are not in cereal crops or grass.
Right.
So, like when you're talking about blown nodes, that's really a phenomenon that is specific to grass type plants. So, uh, wheat, corn, barley, that kind of stuff. But other crops have a different kind of structure to them, and
Well,
we
it's
see
still a
different kinds.
pulvinia, isn't it? That bit that's orienting the leaf on the soybean there.
It's actually where the soybean plants are kind of like a vine type of plant. It's almost like a bush. And so there are all these different branches off
Yeah,
of the
yeah,
main
I grow
stem.
them. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and so this is called a leaf base. It's where it attaches to the main stem.
Hmm.
And we saw massive damage to soybean plants in which you see the sort of desiccation of that leaf base. And I'll show you a cross section here on the next
Can,
slide.
can
But
I
I
can I
also want
pause
you to,
there because
yeah, yeah.
I mentioned about the wind hex. The wind hex does something bizarre. It grinds material, and you get the desiccation for free, energy wise.
Mm.
It's what they
So I,
say. So like, and I'm saying that the when you get the charged material going in, and it produces this fractal toroidal thing, because it's substructures and the materials going through there, they get all of the water separated from it, but without it having to use the energy to boil it out of there. But so the water could be lost. It can be desiccated, but it's not desiccated in it, but through boiling through microwaves.
yes. But the secondary effect here, which we see in soybeans, and sometimes we've seen this in maize, corn. Do you see on the right hand side the affected plants there that there's
Hmm.
like a weird red purplish discoloration?
Yes.
Okay, that is Levingood identified that that's a chemical called anthocyanin that
Right.
is produced in plants when they get under stress, and it's like what the leaves on trees change when when it gets to the fall colors.
Hmm.
As plants get stressed, they begin to produce this chemical. Well, literally overnight, we see this produced in these plants, in soybeans and in corn. Farmers sometimes see this effect in those types of crops on the edges of fields that are often exposed to high winds. They call it wind burn. And yet we see this not just on the downed plants inside these crop circles, but also on the standing plants along the outer edges of where things
Yeah,
have
so
been
I mean,
flat.
the event horizon and all of these phenomena is extremely precise, but
Yeah.
it's the fall off will be between something that will affect a plant and something that will not affect a plant, but there will be things caught on the boundary, and you might find it's
Mhm.
even on
Right.
one
So I
side of
just
the
wanted to show
stem.
the, yeah. hmm I just wanted to show this cross section of that leaf base. So
Yeah.
the one on the left is the control. The one on the right is one of the ones that are affected. So you can see that the little hairs on the outside of the plant are unaffected. It's just that what they call the parenchyma tissue, which has been affected, and it doesn't affect down to the core, so the plants are still alive, still growing. I can show you a picture of
Yeah, so
what the
again,
flat.
those leaf bases orient the leaves, as far as I understand it, in a similar way as the pulvini in the grass. But it's what I would suggest there is that particular piece got like it got in the zone where it's either causing water to completely separate with effortlessly or it's not, and it's such a discrete line. It's like a threshold you have to reach at which the water just falls out of the plant. But because
Right.
I would suggest that and I don't know, but I would suggest there would be high cellulose and low water content in the actual hairs. They're not affected because they're like wood, right?
Yes. Yeah, it's a pretty unusual effect.
It's not
I did
burning. It's
want to
not heat.
no. I did want to show that Levingood talked about, how you would get that sort of accelerated growth rate from taking seeds that are exposed in these plants and having them grow. But on rare occasions, crop circles will exhibit this effect. So this field was harvested, and the following spring, the plants that were in the field began to grow faster in the area where the formation occurred. This is called an echo effect. And there's probably been about less than 20 of these examples with crop circles that are known. And in this particular crop circle, this is one of them, where when we went back the following April, the plants that were in the field were there in where the crop circle had been were growing faster than the surrounding area.
Yeah, I mean,
And so
intuitively, I'd say that maybe when they were lying down, they held more moisture into the water, into the ground. Or
this hasn't been replanted. This is
no,
just
I understand. Maybe the
yeah,
seeds were
yeah.
down there. Are they actually the next crop, or are they weeds?
No,
Was
just
it?
weeds. It hadn't been replanted yet.
Yeah, so it could
So
be
this
because when you lay stuff down like that, you start to get mycelium coming in and digesting the cellulose and maybe putting that nutrients in the ground. I spend a lot of time lifting up cellulose-based material to find porcini, right?
yeah.
And if you don't have any cellulose-based material, forget finding any porcini. But if you've got a nice thick layer of pine needles or whatever, or you've got a load of leaves from the previous season, and the mycelium have gone under there. Any weed that can get there, it's got a fantastic array of nutrients to get going. So I think possibly that could just be because of the mechanical laying down of the wheat and the lack of harvesting at that point or something.
But you would think that that would happen much more often, but we only see this in very rare
Well,
occasions.
I don't know how the farmer harvested the field. Like, did he
Yeah.
do a basic harvest? You don't want to scoop up rotting things that have been lying on the ground. Maybe it was wet at the wrong time. Like when you're trying to harvest wheat, you have to look for a very specific amount of moisture content in this grain. And so you would probably find when the grain was at the right moisture content, but you wouldn't want to lift up the stuff on the ground because it's probably got a much higher moisture content. So you would leave it there and then you
This
might
is
plow
this
it
is
back in.
actually this was soybeans, and
Right.
so it didn't really drop soybeans to be replanted or
No, but
anything
the
like
actual
that.
the soybean bean plants themselves would have, allowed cover for even insects or whatever, the whole microcosm of biology that would go under those layered plants. You know, it,
I understand what you're saying, but
yeah.
you would think that that would be an effect that would happen much more often because you have that affect, the mechanical effect with just about every crop circle, man-made or otherwise, right? But we don't
Yeah,
see this
no,
effect.
no. There's so many variabilities, isn't there? You've got like what the
Yeah.
crop farmer did, when the farmer did it, what they did after they did their harvesting. Did they plough the field in? When did they plough it in? How dry it was? How much wet it was? Whether it's an area that produces a lot of mycelium activity or whatever. There's so many variabilities. There's it is interesting, and it's a lovely photo. And I've seen something similar. I
Yeah.
think something was shown to me almost of the opposite effect, either by the Russians, where they show that when they get a lightning strike, that the year after there's either more or less growth around the lightning strike, but in the area it's different. So
Hmm.
yeah, I think it is interesting. But like having weeds grow more where you've got your thing is probably not what we're trying to work towards. But yeah,
No,
very, very
but I
interesting.
wanted to
Anyway,
show that
guys, I'm going
they're
to have to duck out now.
Yeah,
So
okay.
thank you very much
it's
for
nice to
sharing
see
your
you, Andrew.
research, Jeffrey. And
Hmm.
I'll let you carry on the discussion. And thanks to Bob for inviting me and carry on the
Andrew, could you just before you
analysis
go
discussion.
talk about just the name of your website, and also I'll pull up the link to your book again, or to the
Sure, yeah,
art.
it's just checktheevidence.com, all one word. And
And I've
there's
got a
stuff on
link here
there.
to his crop circle
Yeah,
document, bit.ly/cc/Andrew J.
thank you. Yeah, and that's actually a PDF of the book, which is about a third of the pages are on crop circles, crop formations, and the other two-thirds are on this sort of aliens and UFO crashes and all of that stuff. It's about 300 pages long, that book, so it's a bit of a read, but hopefully folks will get something out of it. And it is free on as a PDF. So yeah, so thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you very much,
And,
Andrew. Have a great evening.
yeah, and you take care, everybody. Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye for now.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay, so I have got the paper by Kapitsa. So I think we'll try and run that now. So here's our friend Kapitsa here, and we'll try and share this window. And let's hope this works. I'm gonna have to find better ways of doing this on Zoom. So yeah, Andrew's a very interesting guy. Nothing is off limits, and that's what I think all researchers should, the approach all researchers should take. Of course, you do need to be focused if you're going to know a lot about one thing, but sometimes you can understand things by looking from different perspectives. Okay, so let me see if I can share this now. We are going to share this one. So you should be able to see this. Can you see that, Jeffrey?
Yes.
Okay, I have never read this. It's in the second of 3 volumes of the work of Piotr Kapitsa. This guy was incredibly prolific, and we'll read it now. I think it's 3 or 4 pages long, and let's see if we find any insights from this absolute genius. The nature of ball lightning has so far remained unelucidated. This is accounted for by the fact that ball lightning is an infrequent phenomenon, and since there are as yet no indications that anybody succeeded in reproducing this phenomenon under laboratory conditions, ball lightning does not lend itself to a systematic study. Many hypotheses have been put forward about the nature of ball lightning, but the one with which we are going to deal in this note has apparently so far not been suggested. The main reason why attention should be drawn to our hypothesis is that verification of it leads to a definite trend of experimental investigations. It appears to us that the earlier suggested hypotheses on the nature of ball lightning are unacceptable, since they contradict the energy conservation law. This is due to the fact that the luminescence of ball lightning is usually accounted for by energy released in some molecular or chemical transformation, and thus the source of energy providing the luminescence of ball lightning is assumed to be in the ball lightning itself. This encounters the following difficulty of principle. From fundamental concepts of contemporary physics, it follows that the potential energy of the molecules of gas in any chemical or active state is less than the one which must be spent for dissociation and ionization of the molecules. This makes it possible to determine quantitatively the upper limit of the energy that can be stored in a gas sphere filled by air of the same size as the ball lightning. On the other hand, one can estimate quantitatively the intensity of radiation of its surface. Such estimates show that the upper limit of the time of luminescence proves to be much less than that actually observed in ball lightning. This conclusion is at present confirmed also experimentally on the basis of published data. On the time of luminescence of the cloud after nuclear explosion. So you can see how the study of ball lightning became very interesting after nuclear explosions. Such a cloud immediately after the... now I've lost myself. Blah, 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 blah. Okay, lost it. Maybe. Okay. On the other hand, one can estimate quantitatively the intensity of radiation of its surface. Such estimates show that the upper limit of the timeliness proves to be much less than that actually observed in ball lightning. This conclusion is at present confirmed also experimentally on the basis of published data on the time of luminescence of the cloud after a nuclear explosion. So very, very critical thing to highlight there. Is it going to let me highlight it? Yes. Okay. Such a cloud immediately after the explosion represents undoubtedly a completely ionized gas and, hence, can be considered to contain a limiting reserve of potential energy. Therefore, one would think that its luminescence should last for a time less than the lifetime of the most long-lived ball lightning. But, as a matter of fact, this is not so. Since the stored energy of a cloud is proportional to the volume d3, while the radiation of the surface is proportional to d squared, the time of energy emission by the sphere will be proportional to its linear dimension d. The cloud of a nuclear explosion with a diameter of 150 meters will be de-excited completely in a time of less than 10 seconds. So 150 meters, less than 10 seconds, okay? We'll see if we can highlight that as well. So that the luminescence of the sphere 10 centimeters radius will last for far less time than 0.1 of a second. I see where he's going here. Very interesting logical reasoning here. But, as a matter of fact, as pointed out in the literature, ball lightning of such a size is most likely to exist for several seconds and sometimes even for a minute. Thus, unless there are unknown energy sources in nature, maybe there are. On the basis of the energy conservation law, one has to assume that the energy is being continuously supplied to the ball lightning during its luminescence. And so we are forced to search for this source of energy outside the space of the ball lightning. Since ball lightning is usually observed to be suspended in air without touching directly a conductor, the most natural and apparently the only way of supplying the energy appears to be the absorption of by the ball lightning of intense radio waves coming from outside. I can see his logic here. Okay, coming from outside, not being emitted from, coming from outside, not being emitted from, coming from outside. Let us adopt this assumption as a working hypothesis and see how it agrees with the most characteristic phenomena accompanying ball lightning. If the behavior of ball lightning is compared with that of luminescent cloud remaining after a nuclear explosion, then the following essential differences arrests attention. A cloud arising after a nuclear explosion increases continuously and goes out noiselessly. Ball lightning remains of the same size during its time of luminescent and often disappears with an explosion. This is very critical. I guess where he's going here is that it's being fed with energy, so much so, and then its containment fails of that energy, and then it goes pop. Let's see where he actually goes. It's quite fun reading this for the first time. Being filled by hot gases of a small density, the cloud of nuclear explosion moves only upwards. Ball lightning remains sometimes at rest, and sometimes moves, but this motion has no preferential direction with respect to Earth, and is not determined by the wind direction. and is not determined by the wind direction. This is an amazing phenomena about ball lightning, which persists here in the 1950s and 1955. We've got it here. The wind is a charged thing. It's got particles in there that can be ionized, rather, and it should be able to push something around, but apparently it doesn't really have an effect on ball lightning often. We shall show now that this characteristic difference is well accounted for by the hypothesis suggested. It is known that an effective absorption of electromagnetic oscillations by an ionized gas cloud plasma can take place only at the resonance when the characteristic period of the electromagnetic oscillations of the plasma is in the same as the period of the radiation to be absorbed. I see where he's going here. He's saying it's got water, CO2, oxygen, or whatever. This needs to have some frequencies that can be absorbed, electromagnetic. So here we go. At those ionization intensities, which are responsible for the bright luminescence of ball lightning, the resonance conditions are determined completely by its external dimensions. If it is assumed that the frequency to be absorbed corresponds to the characteristic oscillations of the sphere, then it is necessary that the wavelength lambda of the wave to be absorbed should be approximately equal to 4 times the diameter of ball lightning. Ooh, D4D. There we go. This is very interesting. I like this. Like this a lot. 3.65D. Very interesting, Mr. Kapitsa. Very, very interesting. If in the same volume the gas ionization is weak, then, as is known, the period of the plasma oscillations is determined basically by the degree of ionization, the corresponding resonant wavelength being always larger than the one determined by the size of the ionized space and, as we have already mentioned, amounting to 3.65D. When ball lightning occurs, the mechanism of absorption can be imagined as follows. In the beginning, there is a plasma, small in comparison with pi over 6 d cubed, but if its ionization is weak, then resonance with the wavelength lambda equals 3.65D will be possible all the same, and an effective absorption of radio waves will take place. Owing to this, the ionization will increase, and so will the initial volume of the sphere until it reaches a diameter d. Then the resonant characteristic of the absorption will be determined only by the form, and this will lead to the fact that the size of the ball lightning will become constant. Indeed, assume that the intensity of the oscillations to be absorbed increases. Then the temperature of the ionized gas will somewhat rise and the sphere will increase. But this increase will bring it out of resonance, and the absorption of electromagnetic oscillations will decrease. So he's talking about generation of a self-resonant cavity. If it gets too big, it's not resonant anymore, can't absorb energy. It then goes back to the resonant cavity, and then it can absorb the energy again. So that the sphere will cool down and come back to a size close to the resonant one. Thus, it can be explained why the observed diameter of ball lightning remains constant in the course of its luminescence. The size of observed ball lightning ranges from 1 centimeter to 27 meters. According to, I don't know what that's for, oh, that's the reference. According to our hypothesis, these values multiplied by 4 will give a range of wavelengths which is responsible for production of ball lightnings in nature. To the most frequently observed ball lightning's diameter of 10 to 20 centimeters corresponds to a wavelength from 35 to 70 centimeters. The most favorable loci for production of ball lightning will obviously be regions where radio waves reach the highest intensity. Such loci will correspond to the potential antinodes. Boom, Mr. Kapitsa. Yes, absolutely. Oh, I love it. Obtained in various possible interference phenomena. Freaking amazing. Absolutely amazing. It nailed it on the generation key nodes. This is where you're going to get those field interference going on. Come on, why you not let me highlight that? That is just a beautiful piece of writing there, Mr. Kapitsa. Okay. Owing to the increased strength of the electric field in the antinodes, the position of these last will fix the possible loci of ball lightning. And yes, and you move them around by moving the antinodes, by phase conjugation and phase shifting that conjugation. Oh, just Mr. Kapitsa, I love you. Such a mechanism leads to the fact that ball lightning will move, as does the antinode. Oh, there we go. It's literally what I was saying at the start of the presentation here. Oh, wonderful. I was actually saying it to Jeffrey earlier on, but anyway. Okay, so such a mechanism leads to the fact that the ball lightning will move, as does the antinode, independently of the direction of the wind or convection air flows. As a possible example of such a fixed locus of ball lightning, we shall consider the case where radio waves are falling on the conductive Earth's surface and are reflected. There we go. You get standing waves because of the reflection of the Earth in this case. There we go. Beautiful. I was talking about standing waves as reflection from the body of an aircraft making the Foo Fighters. But here we go. We got Mr. Pizza talking about from the reflection on the ground. Then owing to interference, there are formed standing waves. Oh my God. I wish I'd read this earlier. It saved me so much effort. Then owing to the interference, there are formed standing waves. Dear, honestly, nothing is ever new. At distances equal to the wavelength lambda multiplied by 0.25, 0.75, oh, these are harmonics, aren't they? So 1.25, 1.75, and so on, there will be formed motionless antinodes in which the potential of the electric field is double that of the instant wave. Near the planes, owing to the increased potential, there are favourable conditions for the production of the initial breakdown as well as for further development and maintaining of the ionization in the cloud forming the ball lightning. Thus, the absorption of electromagnetic oscillations by the ionized gas can take place only in definite planes parallel, oh my God, oh yes, transverse to the standing wave nodes. It's exactly how the ultra experiment works. Oh, Mr. Kapitsa, love it, absolutely love it. Just read that again. Thus, the absorption of electromagnetic oscillations by the ionized gas can take place only in definite planes parallel to the Earth relief. It is this that will fix in space the position of the ball lightning. Such a mechanism explains why ball lightning is usually produced at a small distance from the ground and often is moving in horizontal planes. You can already see, can't you, Jeffrey, how you would be able to move this around? I'm not saying that the structure of the ball lightning and the confinement mechanism is correct, but he's definitely nailed the generation mechanism. The least distance of the ball lightning...
I have a couple of comments to make, but go ahead.
Yeah,
Keep going.
Yeah, the least distance of the ball lightning center from the conducting surface is equal to quarter of the wavelength, and consequently the gap between the reflecting surface and the edge of the ball lightning must be approximately equal to its radius. Okay, so that kind of limits how close you can get to the surface, not only it charging the surface and it repelling it for that reason. Wow, this is information dense if you want to understand how crop circles form and a lot of other phenomena. At intense oscillations, it is quite possible that individual ball lightnings may be formed at a distance of a half a wavelength from one another in a series of antinodes. Oh, you see this as well, don't you? Yes, there we go. Love it. What excellent piece of writing. This is what happens when someone really knows how nature works and they apply it to something else. Such change, and this is a Nobel laureate. This isn't a woo-woo guy. This is a Nobel laureate. This isn't a little bit crazy. This is a Nobel laureate, right? Such chains of ball lightnings have been observed. They are called coupled lightnings and have been photographed. Oh my God, that's what my father showed me. The full balls moving. They were coupled. They were coupled. They were probably in one field, and then you got the interfering field generating them. Oh Lord, it's really much simpler. Such chains of ball lightnings have been observed. They are called coupled lightnings and have been photographed. Our hypothesis can also explain why ball lightning sometimes disappears in an explosion, which causes no destruction. Well, actually, sometimes it does cause destruction, but anyway. When the power supply is suddenly stopped, then for a small size, the cooling of the sphere proceeds so rapidly that there may be formed a sphere of rarefied air, and this sphere is being filled. There arises a shock wave of not very great strength. However, when the energy is being slowly emitted, The quenching is a calm and noiseless process. Well, they do fizz, but anyway. Yeah, this is very interesting. So he's effectively saying it shrinks and it creates a bit of a vacuum. So it's like a it's a slap. It's like a cavitation bubble. Wow. The hypothesis suggested by us can give a satisfactory explanation to perhaps the most incomprehensible property of ball lightning, to its penetration into a room through windows, openings, and frequently through chimneys. Getting into a room, the ball lightning either soars or runs along conductors. So many of such cases have been described that their existence is beyond doubt. From our standpoint, the case 5, when ball lightning flew into an aeroplane crossing a storm cloud at an altitude of 2,800 meters, is of great interest. In terms of our hypothesis, all of these phenomena are explained by the fact that the penetration of ball lightning into a closed room is due to their following this path of high-frequency electromagnetic oscillations. Okay, so there we go, propagating through openings. But it's not only frequency oscillations. I don't know where the reflection of the ground is when you're looking in this case. But anyway, there's high frequency oscillations. And he says the necessary condition is the reflection, and effectively that gives you standing waves, and that is and also phase conjugation. So somehow this ball lightning was having phase conjugations. It might have been within cloud aspects, but anyway. Chimneys or conductors as over waveguides. There you go. There's your waveguide comment. You know, when you read this, you wonder if anyone's thought of an original thought since he wrote this, apart from the fact that the toroidal moment, but most of it's in there. I mean, even these waveguides are mentioned by some of the leading the guy that you mentioned that actually explained the straight tracks. We can come on to that afterwards. Let's finish it. It's a couple of pages. Usually the size of a chimney corresponds just to the critical cross-section of a waveguide, in which waves of wavelength up to 30 to 40 centimeters may propagate freely, which is in agreement with the observed size of ball lightnings penetrating a room. Thus, the hypothesis that ball lightning is due to the high-frequency electromagnetic oscillations can not only resolve the basic contradiction with the energy conservation law, but can also account for a number of other known and incomprehensible phenomena associated with the phenomenon of ball lightning, such as its fixed size, immobile position, existence of the chain's blast shock accompanying its disappearance, and also its penetration into a room. Here, a question should be raised whether the phenomena of a clustery glow called St. Elmo's fire. Oh, I didn't realise you talked about this as well. This is wonderful. What a beautiful paper. Small, wonderfully information dense, and addressing key points, which has been observed long ago in nature. Yes, very much so. It is also due to electromagnetic oscillations, but of a weaker intensity. Up to now, this luminescence has been explained by the flow of charge out of a spike, taking place owing to a constant voltage arising at large potential differences between Earth and the cloud. Such an explanation has been quite natural as long as this luminescence has been observed on Earth, where a closed path of continuous current can be shown. But at present, there are described cases where St. Elmo's fires have been observed for a long time at the fuselage of aeroplanes in flight. Therefore, it is possible that our hypothesis may also here be of help in solving this difficult. I know where he's going with this. Oh. Although the hypothesis resolves successfully a number of basic difficulties in understanding the process of ball lightning, it should nevertheless be pointed out that the problem is not as yet solved completely by this, because it is necessary also to give evidence on the existence in nature of electromagnetic oscillations feeding ball lightning. Here, in the first place, one has to answer the naturally arising question: why has an emission of electromagnetic oscillations in the wavelength range necessary for the production of ball lightning during a storm not as yet been described in the literature? While no attention has for the present been drawn to a detection of these waves during a storm, it appears to us that the following can be assumed. Since ball lightning is an infrequent phenomenon, it is logical to assume that the corresponding radio waves are to be expected to be caught even more seldom by receivers in a microwave range of radio waves from 35 to 70 centimeters, which is for the present relatively little used. Therefore, as the next step in checking the assumptions made it necessary to work out an approximate experimental method of observing such waves, and to try during a storm to detect an emission of radio waves in this microwave range given here. As to the source of these radio waves, there are apparently two facts in observations of ball lightnings which may be of help in elucidating the mechanism of ball lightning production. One of these is that ball lightning arises most frequently towards the end of a storm. The second one is that an ordinary lightning immediately precedes ball lightning. Well, that would do a lot of charge separation in the air, make a lot of ionized particles. The first fact shows that the presence of ionized air helps, there we go, the production of radio waves, while the second one points out that the exciting mechanism of these oscillations to a thunderstorm discharge. Oh my God, maybe he's talking about the self-mazing of OH. When you produce OH from water moist in the air, OH will self-maze. So it'll produce radio waves in the OH vibration frequency. I don't know whether he says this, but let's find out. This leads to the natural assumption that the source of the radio waves is an oscillatory process taking place in an ionized atmosphere, either in the cloud or near the ground. In this last case, if the source is on the ground, then the region comprised by an intense irradiation of radio waves will be restricted and will closely border upon the locus of ball lightning. The intensity of the radio waves may decrease rapidly with increasing distance from this spot, and hence a sensitive apparatus is needed for observations at considerable distances. If the radio waves are emitted by the storm cloud itself, then they will comprise larger regions, and then their detection will, even by means of a receiver of low sensitivity, will not present difficulties. Finally, as another possible trend of experimental verification of the suggested hypothesis, we should point to the possibility to produce under laboratory conditions a discharge similar to ball lightning. For this, obviously, one has to dispose of the strong source of radio waves of a continuous intensity in the decimeter range and to be able to focus them in a small space. At a sufficient strength of the electric field, there should arise conditions necessary for a breakdown without electrodes, which by means of the ionization resonant absorption by the plasma should develop into luminescent sphere of a diameter approximately equal to 1/4 of the wavelength. So if you've got, 2.45 gigahertz microwave, then it's 1/4 of the wavelength. What's the wavelength? Is that 12.5 centimeters? I don't know. Divide by 4, you're going to get a ball lightning that's about 2 centimeters or 3 centimeters across on you, something like that. Do you see that? Maybe. We certainly see something similar in microwaves, but they don't seem to last long. They do seem to rise right up as if they're hot. What I don't remember is people verifying this particular phenomena, but I do largely agree with the phase conjugation that he's talking about with the ground here. This would be how you generate these technologically speaking and lock them in space, but on the nodes, and you move them around by making traveling phase conjugated waves. So there we go. You just read this paper and you already know how to create and move these orbs. What you need is to produce the ionization in the location, and that is about getting the energy up to a certain degree and forcing the ionization. But if you've already got a moist atmosphere or you've got some charge separation going on, you could use a laser beam to cause some initial charge separation. But to be honest, if you're going to get enough energy into a small space, it'll start forming. And then if you moved it in with enough velocity, you'll get the turbulence going on and it will form the fractal toroidal object. So what he's describing here is a potential way to create the initial states of ball lightning. What we know, and this is what I want to conclude on my points for tonight, is from the words of Schellenberger and the conclusion in the 1986 book of Ken Shoulders on what he called electron validium then, but eventually became exotic vacuum objects. He says that there are no electromagnetic waves being emitted from these structures, none whatsoever. They have this non-radiating boundary, and so they can absorb waves, but they can't emit them. So the idea of emission of radio waves essentially is a non-starter in term from my point of view. But they do emit this toroidal vortex in the ether, it would appear, and that would be my preferred understanding for how this is occurring. Again, also Hal Puthoff, a US naval intelligence associated with Dr. Graham Hubler, very interested in ball lightning research at the US Naval Labs for many decades before the year 2000. Hal Puthoff says that when you get these type of structures forming, these toroidal geometries, and bearing in mind it was Hal Puthoff that brought in Kenneth Radford Shoulders in 1982 to investigate the work of John Hutchison that was doing all these incredible things that we've looked into in such depth. You can understand that when he's describing his patent, that is a communication technology using scalar and vector potentials, it has no electromagnetic waves being emitted from that device. So my point today is that I would absolutely state firmly, from my point of view, it is not microwaves that are creating the actual orbs. Sorry, it's not microwaves that is creating the destruction of the plants, but you could argue that if you're using microwaves to create the orbs to initiate them, and then using scalar interferometry to move them around, maybe there are microwave beams involved, but they don't necessarily need to be microwaves. They only need to be something that is able to work at that potential difference. But now I'm talking myself to think that OH groups do produce microwaves, because the cosmic background microwave radiation is because of OH groups, and so microwaves might be involved in creating these things. So, yes. So microwaves might be involved in creating these things. The things themselves do not emit electromagnetic waves once formed, but they could be moved around by microwaves. But they could be moved around by any scalar interferometry as well. So there might be some microwaves used on the initiation of their production. So microwaves could be used by a military technology to produce them initially, and then they can be moved around by any other scalar interferometry waves. So yes, there could be at the point of initiation some microwave damage, and the first most significant phase conjugation would effectively be at the point of reflection, which would be right next to the ground. Those are my thoughts. What are your thoughts on what the good Mr. Let me unshare my screen there. So there is another paper here which I'm sharing my notes, but I don't want to go into it today because we've already run long enough. And it's a paper where they've done Maxwell equations and found support. This is in 2002 for Kapitsa's work, and I will reference that so you can go and have a look at that. So I will come out of the sharing here, and I would be very interested in the people in the chat. But first, Jeffrey, what do you think about that?
Several things came to my mind when you were reading through that. I don't know how much time you have to
I'm
discuss
good.
it.
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay, well, one case in particular comes to mind is an eyewitness case from 1964 in Indiana.
Yeah.
Maybe I can share my screen one
Yeah,
more
go for it.
time,
Yeah.
and let's see if I can pull this up. Let's see if I can get that to pop up here.
Right. Yeah.
Do you see the
I
full
can see it.
screen?
Yeah.
Okay. So the young guy in the left of center there
Yeah.
was the eyewitness. He was 18 years old. His eyewitness of a ball of light behind his house. He was sitting in his house watching TV about 9 o'clock at night in the middle of June, and all of the lights dimmed down in his house, and then the television dimmed down, and then the power went out. But he saw a bright light coming through the kitchen window. And so
Okay.
he walked outside of the house through a side door, around the back of the house to the backyard, and came sort of face to face with this glowing ball of light about the size of a basketball, about 4 feet off the ground. Um, he described that there that there was something, some force preventing him from moving any closer to it, but he observed that there were all kinds of metal farm implements that they had lying around in the backyard that were all moving towards it.
Well, there we
Um,
go. Were they moving straight towards it, or they were slightly vertical?
Uh, w- well, he described a metal milk container that had fallen off a picnic table and was rolling towards it, a metal lawnmower push mower that was rolling towards it, a metal hoe that had been leaning up against the house was now, he said, snaking its way towards it. There were several metal implements pressed up against a fence that looked like they were
Can I
trying to get.
pause you there?
Yeah.
If this structure was purely energy imparted by a source into a standing wave node, that energy causing ionization and glowing would be insufficient to explain this phenomena that you're just describing.
Mhm.
But what I've
Right.
said is in many different systems that end up producing these iron-rich crenellated spheres, the iron is ripped out of other things. If it's not synthesized in the sphere, it is clearly ripped out. We know it's being ripped out in the case of the Hutchison effect. We know it's being ripped out in case of the Malcolm Bendel thunderstorm generator. We know it's being ripped out in the case of the cavitation of Shishkin, in the ultra cavitation. And we now have an experiment that a 3-year-old can learn and conduct, and it works 100% of the time in 7 minutes. It's called Ultra, and the materials needed are $35 to $40 to buy. That'll run hundreds of experiments, and you need the skills of pouring water, folding aluminium foil, and pressing a button, right? Those are the skills required to replicate this and create this phenomenon. So, and it involves water. It involves aluminium, and aluminium, when you have sound, breaks off the oxide layer. You get bare aluminium touching the water, and that produces heterogeneous dissociation of the water, and that produces OH, which is in there. But then you've got the toroidal structure because of the vortex going on parallel to the plate of the sonotrode, which is transverse, exactly what Kapitsa is saying, but in an electrodynamic sense. It's like, that is such a beautiful paper. So, like, we have a method to test this. Carry on, sir. Carry on.
Oh, sure. This incident, well, let me finish what the eyewitness had to say about it. Was that as he observed it for a short period of time, he decided to go back into the house to call his parents, who had gone up the road to play cards with a neighbor. And so when he turned to move in, then the ball of light flew up, just shot off into the sky. But it did leave behind a flattened, swirled circle in the grass behind the house.
Right.
And it created a larger effect that extended out into the cornfield, which was behind the yard.
Was it asymmetric that it did that? Like, was it all one radius, or was it in a slight asymmetry?
Let me show a kind of a.
I would suspect it would be an asymmetry, but it depends on the aggregation in the structure.
So this is the layout of his house.
Yeah.
I don't know if you can see that.
I can see it clearly.
The circle appeared kind of where my cursor is. In the cornfield back here, there was a sort of partial semicircle.
Hey, there we go.
There, that affected all the plants there. And this was kind of an interesting case, which was examined by a Project Blue Book investigator who found at the center of the circle a uh, unusual sort of metal type of, he called it a metal stone, essentially, that
Was it
was
called a
very much
lodestone, or was it called a Thor's metal, or something like that?
no, he didn't get into that. What he
Uh,
did was he collected it and sent it to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base for testing,
yeah,
um, as well as collecting plant samples and sent those for testing. None of the test results of that, there's no documentation
of
in
course.
Project Blue Book as
Why
to
would
the
they?
result of any of that. But
It's you find stuff, we keep it.
right. But what I wanted to share about this, not just the unusual nature of this eyewitness case, which is associated with kind of a flat and swirled circle,
Yeah.
but there was a woman that wrote in response to this hitting the newspapers at the time. Her name was Iva McCoy, and she was in her 80s, and so
Come on,
she said
she's
that
called
when she
Decoy.
yeah. She reported that she knew exactly what this guy
Right.
had seen.
Yeah.
She said that her and her family had oftentimes sat on their porch and watched these. And she said that these balls of light emerge out of the ground, and the locals called them mineral lights.
You know what? I will be able to share with you an unpublished paper from Takaki Matsumoto where he shows the ball lightnings being synthesized under the ground and the projection lines and how they came out. And he recorded, in fact, in his book, I think he even has some recordings. And at the moment, you can barely read them. So what is it here? It's called... wait. So... Because Hessdalen is an incredibly mineral-rich area. It also has a stream that's sulfurous that comes out of the ground. It produces like a battery. So I think this is part of what's going on here. This is ball lightning. It's on page 225 of Steps to the Discovery of Electronuclear Collapse. And it says, ball lightning during underwater spark discharges and the Matsume earthquakes. And he actually records the effects of micro ball lightning here. Now, we actually have these in stunning colour. They're witness marks from the ball lightning. And I don't know whether he shows it here. No. I have a paper that I'll be able to publish where he shows the mechanism and how they're coming out of the ground. So this is fantastic because this has never been published before. And you're describing this woman's, and they're totally aligning. Although
Yeah,
that's an earthquake, but you can imagine, I don't know if it's a geologically active area, is it where they
you
are?
mentioned sulfur. Charlie Engelbrecht, when he called his parents had seen the ball of light streak up into the sky, and so they returned home. They called the police, and the chief of police came out to investigate. And he said he got about a mile away from where this occurred, and he had this overpowering smell of sulfur. And they
Well,
all
you know
described
why?
the
Because
sulfur.
ball lightning fuses oxygen and oxygen together, which are both 16, and that fuses to sulfur.
Right.
Oh, and by the
So
way, there was this random sulfur in the steel in WTC7, which they can't explain. They say it's because of a lot of acid rain that fell on that building site. But basically, the oxygen disappears from the steel in WTC7 steel, and there is sulfur found there. By the way, just by the way.
this is what came to mind when you started reading that paper, was this particular case. There
Fantastic! This is
Charlie,
wonderful data. Thank you very much.
Charlie Engelbrecht, the eyewitness, we tracked him down. He's still around. We did an interview with him, and he goes into a very good description of it. He still lives in the house, where that his parents owned, and this actually ruined his life.
Oh,
The
so
news
sad.
coverage, of this, was all UFO related, and
Ugh.
he was essentially, sort of hounded as a a crazy person, and he ended up, joining the military and going to Vietnam and had a terrible experience before he
Ugh.
came home. But this is, a really interesting case on a lot of levels because of the government involvement, because of this sort of relationship to perhaps some kind of ball lightning effect. Although he described the ball of light as emitting it was colored red. Um, and I've seen a couple of eyewitness cases similar to this in which they say that it's red, but I've seen like just straight up ball lightning accounts of people seeing ball lightning and they don't describe it as red. So I don't
It
know
can be a
if there's
range of
just a
colours, in
phase
my
shift
understanding,
there.
depending on how much it's spun up, basically.
Right, right, yeah.
And so, if the Russians are very good at detailing, but they can go from a range of colours from invisible, invisible ball
Yeah, that
lightning, if
was
you can
my
imagine that.
thought. That was my thought was I wonder what the range of this phenomenon is, much like the range of that we see in the
Well,
like the
if
spectrum
you
of
saw my
possibilities.
first presentation on this matter, I'm saying that the toroidal moment structure, we know the toroidal moment bearing structure is in there because the first attempt to create a plasmoid was creating one current loop in plasma and another current loop in a plasma, opposite rotations and coming together. And that creates a toroidal moment. So 100%, the very first time this was ever researched by the US Department of Energy at the national labs at Princeton and under Project Sherwood and at Los Alamos, they were creating a toroidal moment. Everyone's talking about these multiple toroidal structures. It's in Ken Shoulder's work. It's in the work of Hal Puthoff, and so this is definitely there. And when these things strike a target in the work of the original plasmoid work, they leave spoked rings. In the work of Matsumoto, although he didn't publish it in a high enough quality, we can and we will in the update, and it has spoked rings. And they, in fact, have subdivisions in the spokes of the ring, right, which is further, but we've shown this before. He didn't publish that data, but it's going to be made available. And so this wheel within a wheel within a wheel structure, if you drive it harder and harder and harder, I believe it will go from invisible in the far infrared through to the visible red, and then all the way through the color spectrum and up into the UV, and then up to and limited up to 2 electron volt X-rays. And this is because this is what I showed potentially is the reason. Ken Shoulders determined that the emission of electrons from these structures is maximally 2 electron volts. But when they blow up, they can emit self-similar clusters, which can then go on to deposit themselves in stuff. These are the sort of charge clusters, but typically they're up to 10 electron volts. He said in one paper that up to the limit of his experimental equipment, he saw 100 electron volts, but I think they're in photons. I need to check that. We observed in a blowing up structure in 2015 in GS 5.2 up to, I think, 300 electron volts. It's called Signal. I was going to pull that in here. I need to check my facts on that, but it's something like that. But the actual electrons tend to be, when it's operating, up to 2 electron volts, and they will then cause other cascades of clusters. And so with the one simple structure, which couldn't have been understood by Kapitsa, but could have been generated by his intuition in explaining at least the initiation of the structure, then it leads to a structure that can blow up, leave a sulfurous smell. It can have this bang sound. It has the same elements in the spectra as we observed in a broken up structure in research in Holland, where you see calcium synthesized, silicon synthesized, and iron synthesized. That was in 2000, I think, 12, 13, 14, published. You can go and see it on Wikipedia. It's the first spectrum of ball lightning in the air. And in that study, they show it moving through a range of visible colors, right?
Mm,
So,
yeah.
yes, it depends on
So
how it's spun up.
the
Carry on.
second thing about in the paper, and you mentioned that there should be no exterior emissions coming from this
No, 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 no,
radiation.
no, no. It's not quite like that. So let me qualify that. the ball lightning seems to attract self-similar structures. It also is pulling in energy, it's self-sustaining, and it spits out self-similar structures that don't quite make it into the core, and they form around the outside. And we know this because in the Henk-Urine experiment, we have a copper pipe and the ball lightning hemisphere, the boundary which glows, took out the copper in that hemispherical section, made it disappear without melting the copper adjacent to it. In a few micron distance away, we have 2-order self-similar structures, 3-order, 4-order, 5-order, 6-order, 7-order, and 8-order. And it's only on the 2 and the 3 that you get this vortex structure, which is why I can predict that you would have had a semicircular structure coming out, going into the center of the thing, in the same way that you get a waterspout tornado type structure.
Right.
So I
So,
would like to know the radius of that and also the curvature that it went in to the core structure, and try and see if that marries the 1969 NOAA image off the coast of California, Florida, of the curvature on a waterspout going in.
so the radius of the affected area, my best guess was about 200 feet,
Okay.
based on the partial curvature within the farm field that was affected.
Okay.
Charlie kind of described how far it was away, where that curvature ended, and so I, based on where the center of he saw where that ball of light was, it appears to have been about a 200-foot radius of area that was affected. Charlie himself, when his parents arrived home and the police department arrived, he was visibly reddened, completely reddened from
Right, so
what
that would be
appears to be.
UV. So, like, whilst you can see
Yeah,
the infrared, you can't see the You can see the red. You can't see the UV that it's emitting, and it may have been
yeah,
emitting anything up to 2. Well, I mean, yeah, it would have been emitting possibly 2 kilo electron volt electrons, but any photon up to 2 kilo electron volts could have been emitted. So he's going to be exposed to soft X-rays potentially, but
yeah.
definitely he would have been exposed to UV.
Yeah, I just wanted to point that out, that was a particular
This
effect
is
that occurred.
fantastic data.
Um,
It's just really
the
brilliant data.
there was also, he reported that the farm animals, that they had some chickens and a cow, or a couple cows, and the the production coming from those animals was significantly changed as a result of this, for several weeks.
Were you
So
talking
the
positive or
cows stopped
negatively?
producing milk, the
Right.
chickens stopped producing the eggs,
Yeah.
that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, the other
I
thing
think
I
they were
wanted
probably electromagnetically shocked.
could very well be.
Or
I just wanted
it
to
could have
point
just,
out
yeah.
one other thing. The guy in the center of the photo, with the tie on,
Yeah.
that is a guy by the name of William Powers. William Powers was hired by the Air Force to do this investigation. They used to hire outside contractors, and he was a physicist at Northwestern University,
Yeah.
before J. Allen Hynek got his job after William Powers left. So J. Allen Hynek, the famous UFO researcher for Project Blue Book and all that stuff. William Powers, in his explanation that he gave to the media and his written report to the Air Force, he put forward four possibilities as explanations for what this kid had seen. First of all, he said it was likely a hoax.
Oh God. Yeah. Right.
Second
Okay.
one that he said was,
Sorry, can I just say it's definitely not a hoax because it has
yeah,
an
right,
orb and a semicircular vortex thing coming into it. That's all I need
yeah,
to know.
right.
That's this
The,
technology.
the second explanation, you'll love this one. This is the first time I've seen this as the explanation. Swamp gas.
Oh, the swamp gas thing.
Okay. Now, this
Yeah.
was not the famous swamp gas thing that everybody makes fun of, but this was an
But the funny
earlier
thing is, swamp gas
thing.
could aid the production of these things.
Yeah, yeah. But the third one,
Yeah.
possibly, was ball lightning.
Well, there we
And
go. So he was
but
right.
well, perhaps.
He was
What's
right.
interesting to know about this William Powers is that when he left Northwestern University, he began to develop scalar technology for the military, and he was the
Okay.
first guy that developed like a device to emit different levels of radiation for for the military to combat protesters in large groups.
Oh,
Like this was crowd control
but that
stuff.
that's exactly using phase conjugation.
Yeah. So that's that guy right there that did that investigation. He went on to do that work for the military in the early 70s.
And my father showed me this thing in 1979.
So I just
Yeah,
this is one of the cases that came to mind when you started going through that stuff because
because we're talking 1955. That paper was published by Kapitsa.
yeah. So yeah, this guy William Powers was a really he's kind of a shadowy figure, kind of a weird character.
Well, I think you were if you're creating scalar wave producing devices.
Yeah, yeah. So that was, and the only reason I came across this case was because about 4 miles from here in 2006,
Yeah.
there was another crop circle that came down in this same area. And one of the things I always do is I always look in there and look through the history
Yeah,
to
yeah,
see if
yeah.
any other crop circles that appeared in that area. And so here's a picture of the crop circle that we investigated in that area. And based on my investigation of this one, we detected higher levels of radiation. You can see the wheat where it's bent at the nodes there to the right of the
Yeah, yeah.
detector. We were picking up higher levels of radiation. This is gamma that was what's in yellow is the controls. What's in red was coming from different points within the crop circle. We also looked at beta radiation and alpha beta gamma radiation detection, so we did
So
see some
okay,
unusual
so
effects.
you still go out and actively look into crop circles, don't you? Or do you?
What's that?
You do you actively still go to crop circles?
Well, there hasn't been a crop circle reported in the United States since the year 2012. So we
Maybe that's
haven't been
why they
picking
said the
up.
window is closing.
Perhaps it is an interesting thing that we would be still going out there looking at them if anybody had reported any, but there hasn't been any reported for more than a decade now.
Right.
And so
Maybe the
uh,
window really did close. Or
yeah,
maybe,
perhaps.
I don't know. Maybe Lockheed Martin decided that they were going to publish the patent in 2013 and they didn't want any more demonstrations.
Yeah, who knows? Who knows? Um, I do think it's interesting that I think I sent in my initial email to you some hypotheses about the connection between these circles and whistlers. Are you familiar with that phenomenon?
Um, Go ahead.
As a ham radio person, you mentioned that you had gotten your license way back in the day. Whistlers are often heard by ham radio operators. It's a phenomenon where thunderstorms generate an emission that gets trapped in the Earth's magnetic field and begins to bounce back and forth between the poles. And sometimes that can come down at lower latitudes. And Stanford has been researching this phenomenon for quite some time. And that there was a paper, or actually a book, that was written by an engineer at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in the early 1990s that postulated that whistlers might be involved with the creation of some crop circles. And the only reason I bring that up is because you're getting similar kinds of electromagnetic propagation that is coming down to the ground associated with the magnetic field lines. And several eyewitnesses have also reported an audible sound associated with some of these things, some of these crop circle formations that, and I played one for one particular eyewitness. I played a range of sounds to get him to talk about what it was. And the one sound that he said, oh, that's the one, was of an audible
Whistler.
recording of
Right.
Whistler
Right.
that Stanford had recorded.
Right. Right.
And so I don't know. I still have yet to, I it's like we're hitting around the edges of this thing, but but we're getting
Well,
closer
well,
to understanding.
we are
Yeah.
and we aren't. I mean, we've got to a point where we can create a thing that has a non-radiating boundary. The science and maths was already done in most of it in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and was starting to be published out after the Cold War in the 90s. It's now accepted and being published in mainstream journals. This structure does have a phase singularity. It can do the Aharonov bomb effect. Effectively can aggregate energy from the environment. It apparently can do it to such a degree that it can rip matter apart. And according to Freiberger, his explanation of a largely similar math treatment to what was done essentially 20 years earlier, published in the Russian journal Electricity. That was from study done in 1988, but actually the paper was published in 1992, and Freiberger was publishing in 2009. When you get this electrodynamic structure spun up, it can cause, according to him, the baryons to lose their reference to the Dirac sea, and the matter falls apart into muons and pions and stuff. Now, if you can imagine that a proportion of that was blowing up at the time that the overall confinement failed, or then you might have a scenario where there is some deposition of pions or whatever into the ground, which would cause some fairly interesting transmutations, which might lead to some short-term decay, which might explain the radiation observations you're seeing on the screen there. You're going to have something like that to have persistent radiation.
Well, one of the things you said in one of your presentations caught my attention, and that was, let me see if I can find my note here on that. That you said that I think this was when you were discussing Ken Shoulder's work. That researchers think alpha particles are being generated, that they're registering those neutrons, but that's not actually the case. Levengood and I had a number of discussions about what exactly were we detecting with our, radiation Geiger counter,
So with the Geiger counter, you're detecting scintillations, and depending on whether you got the lead in the way, you're maybe detecting gamma. But
maybe, but it may be that the electromagnetic fields are tricking the sensor in the Geiger counter
it's complicated. So like in our signal, something went into our into our sodium iodide thallium doped scintillator, and it broke up over a period of time. And I didn't really understand that until really I started studying Shishkin's work. So the charge cluster's gone in there, it's been trapped in a photosite, and it's losing all the energy over a period of time. And so I'll give you an example. There's a guy called Andrea Rossi, and he was running an experiment in 2011. He had invited the press and some scientists into this place in Italy. And the first researcher from Italian Nuclear Frascati Institute that we replicated his device back in 2012. In 2011, he had gone into this meeting, and he was in another room about 7 meters away. And this device requires you to heat up the nickel to a critical temperature and then inject hydrogen, which is effectively what we did when in 2013 we saw our Geiger-Müller tube outside of our device detect radiation. And we said it was gamma because the beta particles couldn't come out and X-ray wouldn't be of high enough energy. But we saw in our scintillator, which was metal cased, in that case, in the Geiger-Müller counter, it had a metal cased ionization tube, that it had to be gamma to get in there, right? It wasn't a pancake detector, so it had to be gamma. So we said it was gamma at the time, but I now realize that what we saw in 2015, what we saw down in 2013, and what this guy, Francesco Celani, saw was this. He had 2 battery-operated gamma detectors, or photon detectors, okay? And he's sitting 7 meters away. There's a closed door between them and the apparatus. And he lists, and you can go onto quantumheat.org, and you can go and see the most complete article discussing this. And what he said was, a few seconds before Rossi came into the room and said the device is now working, both of these battery operated detectors went full scale, and they held there for about 2 seconds, and then they collapsed back. And what we found when we were doing these tests, and we were only about, I guess, 20 centimeters away from the closest, well, maybe 10 centimeters away from the closest part of the reactor, ours lasted for about 90 seconds. Now, if you can imagine, these clusters can bind themselves into metals. Let's say you've got a load of iron on the ground and you've got these metals. They can live in there indefinitely. But you know what? They're excited into an active state by certain types of radiation, like solar radiation can excite them into it. And when they're in an excited state, sometimes they can blow up. And when they blow up, they spill the guts and they produce signals which will be detected by PN junctions. Now, you give me any form of electrical device that doesn't have a PN junction these days. It's going to affect cameras. It's going to affect field meters. It's going to affect scintillators, Geiger-Müller counters, whether they're pancake device or they're ionization tubes. These are unreliable as detection methods for the radiation you think you're observing, but you are observing something.
Right. That's what we suspected. I've reported on this detection of radiation. One of the things that we found is that we've never been able to detect radiation in a circle, even though we can show that the circle was, an authentic circle. We've never been able to detect a radiation past 10 days. And there's not really any isotopes that would be there present,
No.
that a half-life would run out at 10 days.
Well,
But we've
there are
literally
isotopes that, well, I don't know. I don't
we've
know. I'd have to
watched
look.
we've
Yeah.
watched the Geiger counter just
Yeah.
hit that 10-day mark, and then it just drops right down to nothing.
Yeah, so what
Back
you're
to the
looking at
normal
there, I
pattern.
would suggest, is the charge clusters are reaching the end of their useful life. Typically, the ones
Yeah,
produced that I discussed about in the bagel game and that were observed from an exploding metal foil in the Oretskev work at the Kurchatov Institute, and in a number of these other cases, they last for about 2 days. And a 2 day
mm,
one is when you have a coil of a coil of a coil. A coil of a coil of a coil of a coil ends up lasting longer. And you're going to get a spread spectrum of things if you're creating this technologically or even if it's natural. So, yeah, I think, we could probably have a conversation, and I think we should have more conversations. I think probably we should both go away and think about this. Maybe let's come back in about a month's time with our respective thoughts, because I think we have a good chance of nailing this phenomena. And I do suspect that, Matsumoto visited some actual crop circles that were caused by the natural phenomena. They don't look spectacular. They don't have that blah, blah, blah.
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
absolutely certain the technology to produce the phenomena, because I saw it with my own eyes, and now having read Kapitsa's paper, I know why it was a line of balls. It's just so freaking obvious now. So, like, the scalar interferometry would have just made a line of balls where the energy was sufficient to do it, and they're moving left, right, left. Or from me, when I'm looking at that way, it's my left, right, and then left, and then they disappeared. And you're just turning on the beams, they appear. You move them left, right, left, and then you turn off the beams, and they disappear. I mean, it's just like it's so basic. And of course, they're doing it for the scalar waves, and then it's where the beams cross, right? In the case that Kapitsa is saying, it's actually causing the reflection off the ground, and the phase conjugation occurs in that place. The whole thing is I hate to say it, but when you get to the point of understanding it to a certain degree, it becomes a bit boring, to be honest.
Yeah, talking about those kinds of beams. You see this picture here?
Go on, show
This
me.
was taken by a
I
witness.
don't see a picture. I don't know. You're
Oh, you
still
don't see
sharing
this?
your
Let's see if I can
presentation.
get that. This one. Do you see that? Do you see this slide with the ball of light and the beam coming down?
I don't see it. No, you're not sharing. You're sharing your presentation still. You need to unshare and share again.
Oh,
Something.
okay. Let me stop share and then we'll do that again here.
Yeah.
See if we can get that to come up. Here we go. So do you see that now?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, great.
Okay. So this taken with a cell phone from a guy walking along the side of a field. There was a storm that was coming up, and he shot this picture. Someone else, a distance away,
Yeah,
shot
that's
this
good
picture.
correlation. Can you
However,
triangulate those two locations?
well, here's the thing. Nothing happened in the field except the following day the circles showed up. This happened in
Interesting.
Italy
Right.
back in 2003. And so I'm not quite sure what
I
to
mean, this
make
is
of,
the focus beam that I would expect to come out of a toroidal, and you would need six. It would need to be a minimum of 6 Tor to get that level of non-spread on the beam.
right. So it at the time there was nothing seen in the field, nothing affected, but the following day the circles were there. Um, so
Well, it could have
it's kind
set
of
up
like
the
a
ether
weird delayed
vortex.
reaction.
By the way, like I say, that thing could still have been in the sky doing its work, and it went out in the visible spectrum.
But yes, out of the visible spectrum, right.
It's still doing its job. This is the thing. It's like just because you can't see it means doesn't mean there isn't something
Right.
electromagnetic there.
Yeah. So this is I just as you were talking about that, this kind of came to mind as one of the things that
Yeah,
as we're
you
trying to
know
piece
what?
it all together.
What you're seeing there, you could have seen the laser beam that did the ionization, and you could have seen the phase conjugated waves that defined the original sphere, right? And
Hmm.
so, like I suggested earlier, you might use a laser beam to initiate the process to do the ionization. I mean, if you've already got
Right.
a cloud system and thunderstorms, you're already halfway there. But I can tell you what I
One other
saw
thing to
was a
think about.
completely clear sky, totally clear sky. When my
Mhm.
father showed me and my brothers and my sister these phenomena in 1979, absolutely beautiful, clear late summer night.
One other
So
thing to think about, and this somebody asked me about this recently, because they were asking about any reports of crop circles up in the Arctic Circle. And I have not seen any reports there, but I've also not seen any reports around the equator. They only seem to appear in the mid latitudes, and that's also kind of the area where whistlers come down
right.
to the ground. I don't know if the scalar technology is limited to mid latitudes, but we don't see crop circles appearing at the equator or at the Arctic
Well,
or
it's
the
not a lot of
Antarctic.
crops at the Arctic, is there?
No, but I mean, the farthest I've seen, there, we documented two reports from Alaska and one in Canada up in the Northwest Territories. The Canada one were two separate circles in poplar trees in which the trees were bent down and
Right.
flattened. But uh, you're not looking at anything higher than like 54 degrees latitude, roughly. That's
Well,
about as
here's
far
the
north
thing.
as you get.
Where do you see sunspots occurring on the sun? And you might have your answer.
Roughly about 20 degrees latitude is the average.
I think you'll probably have your answer there. That's where electromagnetically you could create these effects.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you see those kinds of effects like the great red spot on Jupiter or the great dark spot on Neptune. You get those kind of large scale storm effects at that latitude. Sunspots, that's the average
I
latitude.
think that what you're looking at is an electromagnetic scale invariant phenomena, and you can synthetically produce it, or it can be produced naturally.
Right.
I think outside of the less interesting ones, I think even the ones my father showed, the one my father showed me in 1985, that was man-made, and I think it was probably controlled by the same equipment that showed us the orbs in 1979. I think the same, and it's a perfect place according to various theories of with the aquifer there and the properties of the charge in the ground at that time of the year. So in the summer, so
Right. Yeah, I actually talk about that in that effect in some of my presentations. I'm trying to find the right slide here,
Hmm.
but yeah, here this kind of thing. Crop circles don't appear, we don't find them appearing anywhere and everywhere. Um, but they do appear, over the top of underground aquifers or near, some kind of body of water. Oftentimes we see them appearing in association with power lines.
Hmm.
Usually at the downslope or the bottom of a hill. It's almost never that we see these on the tops of hills. It's
Hmm.
usually very, very down low in the landscape. And so this is just, I've been talking about that probably for 15, 20 years now. That the aquifers seem to play a role, maybe. Um,
Well, water. I discussed this like in Parkamov's book. You can detect through divining water and metal, but water and metal are both two things that absorb this dark matter. And
mm.
so if you either have to have a source or a sink, and they're both of the dark
I
matter.
wondered how much the ground charge plays a role in it because with the aquifer during certain times of
Yeah,
year,
this
as you
we
pointed out,
discussed it in the
yeah,
one or other. I think I did in the first or definitely the second
right. So
presentation.
as the water is percolating, it's
Yeah,
stripping ions away
yeah, yeah,
from
yeah, yeah.
whatever it's nearby, and you get a weird imbalance of ground
Yeah, that's why I
charges.
think it's. But if you had this technology and you were, I imagine what this is what I imagine happened. They were playing around with this technology shortly after they managed to work out how to do it, probably in the 1950s. And they were seeing how much they could use these things as decoys, as targets, as, things to confuse pilots with or whatever. And they got them as close as they could to the ground and they started manipulating crops. And they go, oh, this is interesting. Maybe we can actually draw pictures with them. And then they found that over certain fields it was better than others. But, if I know for a fact they must have had these technology in Sussex at that time in 1979. So for me, the idea that they would go and draw a picture in 1985 is not a lot of effort to come to the conclusion. Someone worked out somewhere that these balls could do this thing, and probably that nine times out of ten they don't even have to be visible. It's kind of like I would argue that if I wanted to do this and not be noticed doing it, like with this technological process, I would try and avoid the balls getting over energized. But what you can't necessarily predict is the overall energetic environment where you're going to be using them. And it might be that when they are visible, they are the rare occasion where the actual act of doing it combines with the local energetic conditions to end up with them being over pumped, and they become visible and they reveal themselves. Um, and there we go. Really, I think mostly it's technological. I think mostly it's humans. I think almost all UFOs. Like I can't even believe that people. Sorry, there's people I know that are probably watching this stream that go to conferences and they look up in the sky and they see these balls and they think, oh, they've come to visit us. And it's like, well, if there's people that are trying to get a group of people to believe that, well, I already know from when I was 7 years old that you can technologically do this. So like you could always arrange for a display. But if they are really UFOs, tell me when they've landed on the ground and the little green men have come out, right? Tell me that, right? Or grey, or lizard. I
Right,
don't know. Just choose your apparition, you know. But like, if it's a
right.
ball of light in the sky or a constellation of balls of light in the sky in any kind of arrangement, it can be produced, in my view, relatively technologically simply. I think we're getting to an understanding of what that is. Can I make it? No, I haven't made it, but we've made little ones in the lab and they produce the same patterns, and this is plasma, so it's scale invariant.
Yeah, I think that might be a possibility for the explanation for some crop
Oh
circles,
yeah,
but I don't
there's
know that
fake crop
all.
circles, fake crop circles.
Yeah,
There is man-made crop circles which are not fake crop circles, and the man-made crop circles use the same phenomena that natural crop circles use.
right.
And so if you see even a super duper really fancy crop circle, you'll know whether it was made with the same process as the natural ones, which might just look like a bit of down corn here and there or whatever. because they're using the same natural process. We're not inventing anything. We're just leveraging a tool that nature's given us, and it is the best tool. It's the God's toolbox with a little g.
It would be interesting to get an enterprising farmer to sue the government for damaging his crops as a result of the technology being used.
Yeah, well, given the fact that I think Judy Wood took the writers of the report after 9/11 to the Supreme Court, and they said we can't try this on national security grounds, because they said that it
Well, you
didn't.
might get that.
What?
You
She
might
did a
get
key
that.
tam case and took it all the way, and but they said we can't hear it because of national security. So like.
Right.
The only way you're going to ever get anyone convinced about these things is we have to do it for ourselves. Don't wait for the aliens to reveal themselves to us. Ain't going to happen, right? Right? Even if they were doing it, they're not going to tell us they're going to do it. And even if they know that other people on the planet are going to do it, they don't, because this is the most amazing technology that exists in this universe, right? And this is just a little bit of what it can do. So you don't want to admit it. You don't want to help people, but we have to do this for ourselves. You know, there's always going to be people getting in the way, causing confusion, making, limited hangouts. There's going to be false stories. There's going to be bad actors. There's going to be infiltrators.
That's why I've always said that these encounters with the military, it's just like a sideshow. I don't pay much attention to it. I try to keep focused on
listen. What I can say, Jeffrey, is I have really, really appreciated this conversation with you. I really have. And I had to have Andrew on it because Andrew was my gateway drug into this particular phenomena.
Right.
Most of the time when I was considering his work to me, it was just like, oh yeah, my dad showed me a crop circle in sometime when I was young, and that's as much as I even bothered to look at it until a few weeks ago. Right, I couldn't even remember what shape it was, but I knew where it was and roughly that I was a young boy and where I was living at the time. So like that narrowed it down. And so like this has been a real trip and a ride these last couple of weeks. And I put the Chilbolton 2000 and crop circle on my wedding ring. So because I was that convinced, that is a communication method. Long before I realized that in 1993 that Hal Puthoff is saying it's a communication method, and before he admitted last year he's actually got more patents for that same versions of that. It is what it is. And
at some point we might have a discussion about the fractal patterns that we're seeing.
Well, I think the fractal patterns, and that is a fractal pattern, by the way. It's a representation of a fractal pattern, a two-order fractal toroidal thing, which is the minimum that you need to produce this thing at every level. You listen, if you've got a ring soliton and it's sucking things through and it's going around like that, and some of it goes through, it'll just go through in a straight line. You need another one, which is an opposite ring soliton, and some of it will be pulled round and then it makes a ring, and that starts to make the ring of the next order. So, like, it's so freaking obvious, and and that it took that crop circle did it for me, and then it came down to the impact marks and working out how the impact marks can have these kind of orthogonally arranged components, and then how did I know that the work had already been done in the Soviet energetics program to how these can be stable, and they produce effectively an anapole. The thing about an anapole is normally you have oscillating poloidal magnetic fields and then oscillating electric field, and they cancel each other out at the non-radiating boundary. And that is actually the diagram that's drawn in the 1993 Hal Puthoff scalar and vector potential communication patent. So he's drawing an anapole, and this was discovered by Zeldovich in 1953 or whatever. Okay, but you have to come through to a paper in 2017 in the West before you have an admission that when you get these fractal toroidal structures, you don't need the oscillating electric field, the actual magnetic fields, and the inducted electric field can automatically be cancelled out So it's what Ken Shoulders called in 1986 is a perfect monopole oscillator. That is the Evo. That is the ball lightning, right? And it's all there. I mean, it's like you don't have to debate it, uh, and you know. To think that these different sides of the pond weren't talking to each other, they really were.
Well, they don't teach that in your plasma physics course,
Right.
right? They just
Probably
don't
not.
they don't teach that stuff.
No, no, they don't. But like
Uh,
I've asked rooms of scientists, you know, do they know anything about the toroidal moment? I did it a few years ago to everyone in the cold fusion field that was assembled in the room, and no one knew. They didn't even know what an nanopole was, right? Like, and it's like I'm an artist coming at this from a look at what nature is doing and why is these patterns there and why are they scale invariant and you know what can explain this. And 5 years later or 4 years later, I'm seeing this phenomena. It has an electrodynamic explanation, and no one's discussing it in the West. No one. And it's like, and it is the way ball lightning works. So like anyway, I think this has been one of the most satisfying talk throughs. I have to give credit to Kapitsa. That guy is a genius. I'm almost inspired to buy his complete works and read through them because the way he's describing that and that is a small little paper. It's just a thought note and
yeah.
beautiful bit of writing. He's only trying to explain how they can really form and how you can get the energy into them, but he's not realizing you could end up by creating something that is able to pull its own energy in and potentially even disassemble matter. And if you get a chemical reaction, the most energetic chemical reaction, I think, is two hydrogen atoms coming together to make the hydrogen molecule. I think it's 4.2 or something electron volts, right? That's the most energy you can get out of a chemical reaction, period, right? When you take 930 or 940, whatever it is, million electron volts from one proton and you convert that into photons and electrons, that's 938 million electron volts or whatever it is. Just one proton. You only have to get one proton occasionally decaying, and you've got a fantastic amount of energy, which is going to cause more ionization and keep the whole process running. So it's not surprising that they have this long-lived thing, but you have to trigger them to occur. And what the Russians do typically is they create a thing called a plasmatron. They use a microwave generator to create charge clusters. And it's the same thing as the PAP engine. He used a radioactive material or a Jacob's ladder to create the charge clusters, and you build them up. Who's the other
Or like
one?
Levengood, he was using an ion and electron avalanche or charged couple device, I think.
Yeah, yeah. So some field effect, field emission
Yep.
device or whatever to create, and then he's using a DC bias, so the drift is always in one direction, and then you're having oscillating AC, but it's always in the same direction. So it is breaking through it's the field tension is periodically going through the breakdown voltage of the dielectric of the air in between the gap. So and then you get a breakdown voltage, which is a sudden flood of electrons. That's the avalanche of electrons. The avalanche electrons produces a highly turbulent environment. It produces ions. That produces ion electron clusters. That is the Evo, right? So it is the same thing as making ball lightning. He's making little ball lightning in the way that ball lightning makes itself, right? And so the reason is at the end of a thunderstorm where you've got a lot of highly charged air and ions and stuff around the place, you know, you can smell the ozone in the air or whatever sometimes after electric storms or whatever. You can have a situation where it's optimal for producing these things, but maybe you need to give it a little nudge. Maybe if you've got a highly charged air, like the other thing is maybe that's it. Ah, okay, right. So Tesla went to the desert, and so did Henry Moray. Why? Because it was dry.
Hmm.
And it's dry. When it's dry, static electricity builds up in the air because you've got all the photoionization from the atmosphere. So you don't
One
need
of
moisture, and then that's it. So you then
one of the
use your
things
scalar
that one of the
interferometry.
things that
That's how.
Terrence Meaden
Sorry.
one of the things that one of the things that Terrence Meaden found was that most of the crop circles that he was looking at, they were finding that during the period of time that they were checking all kinds of data from the local area during the time that crop circles were forming, and he found that almost inevitably there was a there was a change in the atmospheric pressure um, that was happening.
This
Now,
is what I see going on in Hestalen. And when I was looking into how the thunderstorm generator work, I was looking about where he was getting the best effects. Like when I mean that by that, the plasma looking loops going on. And I think
let me
probably,
mention one other thing that you might find
yeah.
interesting if I can pull this up.
So you
Um,
have a choice. You
yeah,
either
here.
have to have lightning or lasers or something
Okay.
similar producing your charge
Yeah.
separation, and then you use
So
your either natural scalar interferometry or you have a very dry environment with a massive amount of charge clusters already latent in the environment, and then you again use the scalar interferometry, and I think that's probably what I saw in 1979.
so I don't know if you can see this. Um, is it? I don't
If
see it
anyone,
showing up.
I'm gonna wind this up in a little while. If anyone in the YouTube wants to ask a question now, put question in capitals, and then I will ask. And I will ask. Carmen's on the call. Hi, Carmen. I would like to ask Jeffrey if you'd like to join me possibly in Canada sometime next year to give a conference on this and related subjects.
I guess it's possible. I don't know. It
But
all depends
because
on the details.
I've so
Yeah.
enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah.
I think that you have a lot to offer. And can you just, before you go into what you're saying now, can you just talk about your website? Is it possible?
Sure. The Independent Crop Circle Researchers Association, which is what our group is and what I became the head of, was we developed iccra.org, and we put all of the information that we've collected in terms of individual reports of crop circles for the United States on that website for everybody for free. We don't do any advertising. We don't what we did was we tried to take the economic incentive out of putting that out there because there's so many people that try to make a living off of this, and so we took that economic incentive out and we put that out there freely for everybody to share that information. WC Levingood also asked us to put out all of his information, so all of his reports are out there. I added all of his different patents and all of his other previous scientific papers. So you can see the range of science that he was involved in. He wasn't a dumb guy. There was that mention by Andrew earlier. He did not get a PhD. He did do all the work for the PhD, but when he went to do his oral exams, evidently there was one particular professor that just really pissed him off or whatever, and he walked out of it and he never got the certificate, even though
Right.
he did all of the work for it. So some people refer to him as Dr. Levingood. He actually never achieved that, certificate for it.
Well,
But
people call me doctor,
nevertheless,
and I have to spend the whole time telling them I'm not a doctor.
yeah, he got his, he used to just people just called him Doc as a
Yeah,
result of that, or they called
yeah,
him
yeah.
Lefty. That was his
Well,
nickname.
certainly he
But
was an accomplished man, I have to say.
yeah, he definitely was a pure scientist, just
Yeah,
involved in
yeah,
just pure scientific
yeah.
research.
Full
That's all he
respect.
did. Yeah.
And I'm
Um,
quite jealous that you got to work with him. I really am. So,
yeah. He could be very selective on who he decided to let into his
I think
circle.
he made a good selection with you, and I'm not
Well,
trying to,
I appreciate
fluff
that.
you up here, but listening to you today has been really a real pleasure.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. I was young when I was in my 20s, but I had, kind of a very, very keen interest in this subject. So I am, who knows why he decided to let me in. But this particular slide that I'm showing, I don't know if you can see that.
Yeah.
Okay, so back in 2005, I got a call from the National Weather Service here in the United States. One of their local offices in upstate New York called me. One of the roles that the National Weather Service performs is that when there are tornadoes that go across the landscape, they send out people to go and evaluate the damage, and then they calculate what the wind speed is, and then they assign, is that on the Fujita
EF3,
scale? Is that a
EF4, whatever.
F1,
Yeah,
F4, F
yeah.
whatever? And so they went out to go and look at the damage from a reported tornado, and they said that along the tornado track, there were a series of downed plants, crop circles, essentially in this field of maize near the town of Canisteo. And they said, this is more your thing, not our thing.
Yeah,
Can you check this out?
yeah,
Well,
yeah.
I took the opportunity to ask them to, because they have access to this data and most people don't, access to the National Lightning Detection Network Array data. And they pulled the data on 1 minute increments over a 15-minute period during when this went through that area. And the National Weather Service researcher was astonished by this, because if you look at this sort of black, square,
Yeah.
you'll see that there's a whole bunch of plus signs and a whole
Yes.
bunch of minus signs.
Yes.
And generally speaking, on electrical strikes are generally given that negative polarization. So
Right.
all the red dashes on there, that's normal lightning. Very, very, very rarely do you get a positive one.
Yeah, yeah.
But during this period of time where you saw this formation of a crop circle happen, they got a whole series of high positively charged lightning strikes in this area. I think this is like a one-off that most people don't get access to this data, but I thought it was really interesting that this was in association with one of those. I'm not quite sure what to make of it, but it's another sort of body of data that exists out there, and maybe
Yeah, I'll
other
have to think
researchers
about
have
that.
access
I'm
to it.
already trying to pattern recognize in the data there, but
Right. If you want more of this, there's like, you can see the movement of it as it goes across the landscape.
oh
This is just
yes, I
sort of
would
the
like to
final
see that.
result.
Yes, I would like to see that, please. Yeah,
Okay. Yeah, I can get you that.
thank you very much. Yeah.
Mhm.
Right.
So
Well, I've got a
just
couple
to,
of questions here. I have one here that says, so for plasma chamber and DC bias is all you need for an Evo battery? Probably, and an F5 tornado in there. No, that's not a question. Okay, I think there was another question a little bit further up. Thoughts on ball lightning forming prior to earthquakes? Yes, I think I'm going to deal with that JK Philly fan when I look into the work of Matsumoto in that subject, because obviously he lived in a place with much more earthquakes than I've been exposed to. So I don't see too. Oh yes, there's a question. Is there a cheat sheet from Korkigos? This is there a cheat sheet on treating plant seeds soils using these insights? Is there a cheat sheet? Well, there is some things in the patent, but I think for what it's worth, I don't know if do you have any access to Dr. Levengood's apparatus on these things that we could maybe use as a basis?
all of that material, including his whole lab, is now gone.
Do you know where it
When
went?
when I do not, when he died, I went to the memorial service that his adopted daughter arranged, and I ended up. She said you can take whatever books you want, but
Right.
as far as all the equipment, I don't know how they were disposing of it. So I ended up
Oh,
with pretty sizable chunk of books from his
yeah,
library and
yeah.
papers and things like that. But outside of that, uh, no, I don't know anybody that got any of the equipment.
Okay. So I'm hoping to work with Paul Harris and maybe develop a little unit. And the idea that people would be able to get this unit, we would create the shielding from the charge clusters, and that would
Right.
come with it. And we would basically ask people to knock themselves out. I mean, I don't mean that electrically. I mean, but test seeds and see if they can come up with data and like have like an online portal where people could put their results up. Oh, I tested it with this voltage for this exposure time, and here's my cress
Yeah.
seeds, here's my sprouting beans and stuff, and do all kinds of tests. Here's my crazy corn and whatever it is, and maybe we could come up with a community-led experimental data seed of knowledge, stone and plenty. So is this about storing
This is
seeds in particular
This
places?
is John Burke's book.
Right.
And if you want some cheat sheets on or notes on what to do with the seeds or what the effects are, I would refer people to that work,
Okay.
because there's some insight in there. Now, Kaj Hallberg is his co-author. I think he's from the Netherlands. He now holds the copyright to the book, which has been out of print since it went published in 2004 or 5. He has now put the book up online on his own website, so you can access all that material for free. The book
Okay, so
sells
if you
now
can send me
used.
those notes or put it into remote view for other people
I
to
think
be
I
able to connect.
included the link in the last lecture. I think I
Okay.
posted that link, or I
Yeah,
might have sent
if
it
you
in
can
the
put it on
letter.
remote view into this blog, then people can follow up on that data.
Okay. I think
Yeah.
I might have included it in the initial email I sent to you.
Oh, great. Okay.
But
I'll have a look back at that.
the
Yes. So I think
that would be some insight. Kaj Hallberg also said that essentially he didn't get any of Burke's material. That all of that got disposed of
oh god.
without anybody getting
All
access
right.
to it.
Well, I
So,
think what we can say is we can understand now how there could be a real effect, how it relates to crop circles, how this has the potential to change farming in a very positive way. But like there's a bit of secret squirrel that was probably needed to be retained in order to maximize the IP back then. And I
right.
think if we can create a standardized treatment device with a detector that maybe you can plug in with a simple USB thing so people can produce time correlated data so they can show how much time they exposed it, and we have a protocol, you photograph it, you do this, and then you store these seeds for 10 days, 20 days, 30 days, 40 days, 50 days, then you do your germination tests, and then you have a standardized way of presenting the thing. Maybe I could work with your experience on that, to come up with that whole protocol. And then we can work on making the device. We'll focus also on the shielding, because we know that these charge clusters, they have biological effects, and we're not just talking on the seeds to the user of the device, and we want everyone to be safe. And so, like, yes, you can detect with the coil outside. That's because they're coming outside, and you don't necessarily want them in the body. They might be positive to your health, but let's assume they're not, and work on the basis that we need to play safe in all of these systems. And so it needs to be a fail-safe system. So maybe there's an interlock on the door before you expose the seeds and you put it in on a tray or whatever. It's like a microwave oven. You can't turn it on without it being shut. But a fairly simple device that is relatively affordable. And then hopefully we can get, 100 people around the world. Don't rely on a university, because if they've got $1 million, there'll only be $100 of that spent on the research, and the rest of it's paying for the department.
Right, right.
Right.
Well, there was one seed company that Leviнгton told me about that adopted the patent and built something and used it and was using that technology. I think they were in Illinois,
Right.
but I don't know that they've had much success in getting farmers to adopt the technology.
Well, here's the thing. You kind of need to make it easy, accessible, and it's like if the community
Right.
have their own interest, like, I firmly believe that the mushrooms that I eat are very important to my cognitive abilities, and I'm not talking about wonky mushrooms. I'm talking about mushrooms that are young and they've got a lot of chi and intention in them to grow, right? They got the intention to produce the spores, they got the intention to produce the fruiting body, and you capture that part of the way through. And I think this is what's going on with seedlings when people eat these just sprouted seeds and they say they've got all these health benefits. I think part of the health benefit is that seed hasn't reached its potential. And there's a whole lot of chi in there and there's a whole lot of intention in there that's been activated through the germination process. And you're imbibing, you're actually putting that into your body and you're getting that intention in a positive direction. And so I think that people, if you can maximize the chi and the rate of growth, then these young greens or whatever they are, the sprouting seeds are going to have a much more beneficial. There's a lot of reasons why people motivated in that health industry might want to explore whether they can improve the rate of seed germination and the volume reached in a certain number of days. Just like if you go into a health food restaurant and you're buying like salad and it's greens and you're paying by the weight, well, if you can produce a lot more weight in a short period of time, well, that's more money. So you've got a commercial incentive for the investigator to look into this. So, and if we can get a database of these seeds with this exposure, this time of delay between exposure and planting, and you get this kind of output, there might be some fakers in there, but sooner or later you'll iterate to a solution.
There may be another alternative, and this was something that Levingood and I explored. There was an ice circle that appeared on a lake not too far from Levingood's house in Michigan. And we went out there to investigate this. There was a near eyewitness who had seen a column of light come down through the clouds during a blizzard,
Right.
heavy snowstorm
Yeah.
at about 3 o'clock in the morning. Went out there the next day, and then there was this big circle in the lake that had frozen back over because of how cold it was. And when we went out there, I didn't know what to make of this. I didn't know how to investigate it because whatever evidence was there was melted in the water, right?
Yeah, right.
But I noticed that on the periphery of the
Sorry, can I just say,
circle,
not necessarily
yeah.
melted.
Okay, well,
It turned to
whatever the
water
process
gas.
was,
Yeah.
it turned to water gas. That vapor had condensed around the original circle
Right.
in like a splash pattern.
Wow.
And in talking with Levingood, we decided to take samples of that splash pattern ice that had refrozen.
And run some seeds on it.
That's exactly what he did. He took seeds and
He's such a
he,
scientist, and well done you.
as a control, he took snow from his backyard, and a third control was tap water, and he germinated the 3 batches of seeds from the same batch. And the one that was from the ice circle water also had the same accelerated growth rate.
Oh, there you go. Wonderful. I think we're
So,
going to leave it on that. This
you
is just
could,
absolutely
yeah.
beautiful. It's been a wonderful experience. I hope the people watching this on YouTube have enjoyed this as much as I have. I hope Carmen is up for you joining us in Canada whenever that might be. I will keep you abreast of that, whether it's going to, when or if it's going to happen next year. But I think we're going to have a real blast getting to the bottom of this, and I think there's a real potential here to transform farming. My father was a farmer. I love to grow, and so no one's. My passion is mushrooms. I would like to see if this has an effect on the growth rate of mycelia or the fruiting rate of mushrooms, because that is a whole next level of market that could be considered here, which is not being considered. But or maybe it will have a negative effect, and maybe that has good applications in dealing with dry rot or black fungi and stuff. So let's not just look on. You can have positive effects which are actually negative effects for the thing. But I like the idea of using this electromagnetic way of improving or denuding without using chemicals per se that have a long persistence in the environment. So. Thank you very much. Is there any last words you'd like to say?
I'm just happy to contribute and happy that you invited me to come on. I'm always happy to talk to people who actually have a serious interest in crop circles, because people that do, and you're sort of coming at it from such a technical expertise that you understand some of the physics behind it that in a way that most people do not. And I'm just happy that you asked me to contribute. So.
Awesome. Well, reading through the Piotr Kapitsa's paper, looking at some of your slides, having fun with predicting what you're going to say next, what Kapitsa is going to say next. It's been a real joyride. I feel like I've gone to a theme park with all my favourite rides, and I haven't been on them yet, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
I know what they're going to feel like, and I know, you know, the emotions I'm going to feel, but it's been real awesome. So I think there's lots more we can do together. So thank you very much. And with that, I'm going to say goodbye to the people on YouTube. And so I'm going to say thank you very much. Buenas noches, dobra noc. This was a crop circle discussion, and thank you for all your engagement. Please comment or ask questions in remote-view.icu or on the YouTube stream, and hopefully myself or Jeffrey can get back to you, and also Andrew Johnson with answers. Thank you very much. I will see you in the next video.